Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Monday, April 13th, 2020. I will be chairing this meeting in place of Joe Knox this evening. As many of you may have known, have heard, Joe's wife, Kathy, died unexpectedly this past week. And I just wanted to take a few minutes on behalf of the board to say a few words about Kathy. Kathy was a lifelong resident of Littleton, and she was married to Joe for 48 years. To quote Kathy and Joe's son, John, she was your most honest critic, loudest cheerleader, and the most trusted advisor. If you knew her, she warmly invited you into her home. And if you didn't know her, she warmly invited you into her home. Kathy's generosity knew no bounds, and she was the first person to host a charitable event, make a donation, or help someone in need. She made a huge difference in our community on so many levels, and she touched so many lives. Our thoughts and prayers are with Joe, John, Kim, Steph, Jax, Riley, CJ, and JoJo. And at this time, I'd like to invite you to take a moment in silence in memory of Kathy. Thank you. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I'm going to ask Joe Layton to read a statement that we've put together regarding a change in format in tonight's meeting.
Before you guys jump into that, I'm getting some messages from folks saying they can't get in. Has it been opened up? Yes,
there's, this is Joe, Assistant Town Administrator. Everyone's been let in. We are going to be reading a statement at the beginning about the meeting and everyone being on mute.
Thank you.
And in fact, Joe, I think it might help you if I read it so you can focus on people coming into the meeting.
Sounds good.
All right, very good. Thank you, Acting Chairwoman. The Town of Littleton began conducting remote participations and Zoom meetings pursuant to Governor Baker's emergency order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law on March 19th of this year. Since that time, unanticipated legal concerns relating to the open meeting law have been brought to our attention by the town clerk. Those concerns were supported by the Attorney General's office and confirmed by town council. One concern is that the chat function allows a parallel text conversation to a board's public meeting. Chat is essentially running commentary that is occurring but is not moderated or followed by the chair. All participants and listeners may not be aware of comments being made because some meeting participants join by phone and do not see these conversations. Another concern is conversations between residents within the chat room, which are not incorporated into the public record. In response to these concerns, the town will implement the following changes, which in no way prohibit any member of the public from participating in discussion and sharing information during a public meeting, and will ensure that all listeners and participants have equal access to the meeting. If you wish to participate in the meeting, please use the raise your hand function, that's in air quotes, available on Zoom, or if you called in by phone, dial *9, which will activate the raise your hand function. The meeting host will notify the chairperson of the raised hands, and the chairperson will determine whether and when to allow public comment. When called upon, participants should state their name and address. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. So I'm going to, so tonight's meeting is now in session. Board of Selectmen, Monday, April 13th, 2020. I'm going to read the agenda, which is, the meeting was posted to begin at 6 p.m. Organization, Pledge of Allegiance, and reading of the mail. At 6:05, we're scheduled to have a joint meeting with the Finance Committee with Cheryl Herrick-Stella, the Director of Finance and of Budget, and the Town Accountant to update on the Park and Recreation and Community Education fiscal year 2020 budget and discuss potential revisions to the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. At 6:35, we're scheduled to hear from the department and board updates. We have staff updates regarding COVID-19 and a general discussion regarding COVID-19. At 6:50 p.m., there's going to be public input and members' updates. We have an update regarding the Brown property at 119 Tehadawon Road. At 7 o'clock, we will go into a public hearing regarding a soil removal permit submitted regarding 9 Air Road. At 7:30 p.m., Triumph Modular has requested an amendment to their dealer license location, and the board will discuss that. At 7:35, the town administrator will be providing updates regarding a Green Communities competitive grant application, the Nagog Hill Orchard signature of lease extension, and Bikes Not Bombs 33rd annual fundraising bike ride on Sunday, June 24th, 2020, as well as the Harvard Firefighters annual bike race on Saturday, August 8th, 2020. At 7:45, we'll review our minutes, and then at 7:50, we're going to enter into executive session. Thank you. So if you could, Nina, would you like to start us off with a reading of the mail?
I'd be glad to. In fact, it's going to be pretty simple and straightforward because we didn't have anything in the packet this time, but I'm sure there's more coming.
Perfect. All right, great. So at this time, we'll begin our joint meeting with the Finance Committee. Is the Finance Committee?
Are we going to do the pledge?
You want to do the pledge?
How we usually start the meetings.
I feel like you just don't know what's going on in the fall.
Oh, where's that background noise coming from?
I just found it.
Okay. All right, great. Certainly, if you could, Mr. DeCoste, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Thank you.
Be happy to.
Great.
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
To
to the flag
flag
of the United
of the United
States
States of America,
and to the republic for
for
which
which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with liberty and justice
for all.
for all.
for all. Thank you very much, Chuck.
You bet.
So we're going to begin a discussion with the Finance Committee. We have a summary put together from Cheryl Herrick-Stella, the director, but I wanted to begin with an update regarding the Park and Recreation Community Education 2020 budget.
And I believe, obviously, we have Alicia on the line. And Alicia, I know that one of the members of the Park Commission was going to be here today as well. Did you say it was Mr. Sullivan?
Sean Sullivan. Yep.
Excellent.
All right.
All right, great.
Okay. So I sent out a memo to be proactively brief the Board of Selectmen on this of the PRCE finance in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So for those that are watching that may not be aware, the Littleton Parks, Recreation and Community Education Department operates on an enterprise fund, which means for all intents and purpose that we're a small business. All programs, special events, and staffing, minus myself and the assistant director, are solely funded by the revenue from our patrons. So the PRCE department is currently operating at a deficit due to the severe reduction in revenue since the start of the spread of the coronavirus. Because of this deficit, it will be necessary for our department to ask for a general fund subsidy at Springtown meeting. Up until March, our department was seeing an 18 to 25% revenue increase from month to month in comparison to the previous years. Because of that, I'm hopeful that our department will start to gain revenue quickly once the restrictions are lifted and the fear of this contagion is lessened. The unknown factor in this equation at this time is when will we be able to operate at normal capacity. The sooner we start to gain revenue, the sooner the number needed will lessen. We're also not the only department in this situation. It is an issue across Massachusetts and the nation for parks and recreation departments. So what are the numbers? Right now, we're currently at a $223,000 deficit. And if we reduce department spending to only full-time employee wages and benefits and a few invoices that we are contracted to pay, the total request could be as much as $306,000 with a zero balance at the end of June. This is under the premise that we gain no revenue between now and then. So we've taken the following measures. We've pushed our spring 2 classes back so that most of them will start after May 4th, hoping that we can still operate those programs. We've worked with instructors to offer virtual programs instead of in-person programs. So at this point in time, we've successfully converted 6. We furloughed all of our part-time program staff. Only full-time staff are working. We've implemented the Board of Selectmen's request for a spending freeze. In fact, we've severely cut back our spending since the beginning of March. And today we started a campaign to let families know that we need their support for camp programs to run. In the last hours, we've had 19 registrations. So I'm proactively starting this conversation to gain insight, understanding, and hopefully support outside of our department during this difficult time.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Board of Selectmen. Do you have any questions or comments based on that summary?
I'll jump in. I appreciate the trying to get ahead of this is something that we're trying to look at all areas which are impacted, and they're going to be fast and furious as we get further and further into this, up to and including the tax revenues that aren't going to be, in all likelihood, not going to be received from landlords, from commercial tenants and whatnot. So we do appreciate you getting this to us as quickly and as concisely as possible, Alicia, and Cheryl, for your help in doing that, and for all your staff for their support as well, Alicia. To look at the $306,000 impact, it's one of those things that in the future, obviously, we're going to have to put some sort of a contingency plan in place in the event that something does come up. Right now, we're faced with it. $223,000 right now, $305 plus $306,000. Moving forward, is with you making all kinds of accommodations and cuts, and like you said, it's only full-time staff only. I don't know if there's an up to and including, if we, what the savings would be if we cut more deeply. I'm assuming that Alicia, you and probably the Parks Commission, as well as Cheryl, have looked at what that impact would be. I would imagine it's not going to be terribly significant. Well, we're talking from $223,000, we're talking about an $80,000 jump. So we're trying to find any opportunities to save money that we can. So I don't want that to be our first course of action, but I do think that it is something that needs to be on the table. We need to take a look at the possibility of that happening. Again, very much appreciate all the work that you, the commissioners, and everybody that's helped you out with this, as well as Cheryl and her staff. The fact that you are an enterprise fund puts you in this tight spot, and if you're unable to hold the programs that support you and create that enterprise, it's kind of a live by the sword, die by the sword kind of thing, unfortunately. So I'm not proposing any solutions, but I do see the possibility that it could get worse before it gets better.
Thanks, Chuck. Do any other board members have any comments?
Just a quick question, Cindy. Alicia, this can be a unique experience in Park and Rec departments. Any insight into things that other communities are doing to help manage these deficits that maybe are not currently being considered here, or are currently not feasible here for some administrative reason, or really what are the best practices that other people are implementing to try and manage this?
Yeah, I think, so just to be very clear, we have the Massachusetts Parks and Recreation Association. So Littleton is part of that association. We, in the New England region, there's about 28 departments that all work together. So we have been meeting on a weekly basis since, essentially the beginning of March, to try to help each other through all of this. We realize that if we unite and communicate with each other, we're going to come up with better solutions across the board than if we're all trying to go it alone. So that is something that we've been working very closely with many other recreation departments in the Northeast region, as well as nationally. So at this point in time, I mean, you know, no one could have predicted that there was going to be a why am I spacing the word?
Pandemic.
Thank you, pandemic.
Bad time.
So no one could have predicted that, you know, this was going to be an issue to happen. So at this point in time, you know, it depends. Some of the departments that are on general funds, they've cut back and, you know, reduced staff and done everything to be able to limit that. But it's mostly the enterprise departments that are having more of these bigger financial issues. You know, you think about other departments that have golf courses that are closed. You know, for some of those people, they have dedicated invoices for maintenance and things like that that they still have to pay throughout the year, even though they're not getting income through, you know, those avenues. So like I said, we're working together. There is no magic bullet for this right now. The big hope is that we're able to get back to operating in normalcy so that we can start having programs, we can start creating revenue again. Because, you know, what we do is so valuable to communities. We're not concerned about people coming back and being proactive or, you know, interacting with our programs. We're not concerned about that. It's just the time frame from when we're not allowed to be running those programs, and it's not safe. So that's the other aspect that we are considering is how do we prepare and prep and create policies for those programs so that our staff and the children and adults, anybody that's, you know, going to these programs will be safe in the forthcoming months.
Cindy, can I jump in again real quick?
Sure.
Thanks. Alicia, you mentioned that you guys have the association, which is fantastic that you're an active part of that. Is there any amongst you guys kind of like a political action, like a PAC in some ways, I would imagine? And are you guys going to the State House and saying, hey, are there any funds available for us, just like there would be perhaps for a small business association? You know, are there funds available potentially from a bailout or from, you know, any kind of support programs?
So that I'm not entirely sure of, Chuck. That's a really great suggestion. We as a group have not gone that path yet, but I know that we have sort of had murmurings of that. So we do have a meeting on Wednesday, so that's something that I can bring up. And we have a legislative chair, right. So perhaps they can, you know, take the banner with that and move forward.
Great.
Madam Chair, are you taking comments from FinCom or just?
I was just about to call on you, Mr. Wilson.
All right, thank you. So just you know, looking at the number, that's pretty staggering, obviously, and I think the concern is, well, it's a fact, really, that our general fund won't be able to sustain a projected $1 million deficit from the Park and Rec. That's what we could be facing if this continues quarterly till the end. Correct? We're looking at if we're looking at a 306K already. If this continues, say the summer programs can't happen, that's when we would really have to think about situations where we can only have programming perhaps that is self-sustaining, and we are only financing through the general fund would be salaries. It really could come to that situation, and I just don't think it should be a shock if that's something that we really have to face. Because, like I said, my concern, I think some of the other board members' concerns would be a 306K drain on the general fund. We're all projecting cuts, you know, the schools. We have had a lot of meetings over the last several weeks, and more so the last week. This isn't, I'm not going to say this is unexpected because I did see that it was coming. I read the memo. So my concern is really looking forward how we're going to really take this seriously, and unfortunately it has to come from programming. And during these times, if these programs can't sustain themselves, that's our only avenue for the health of the town. And I'm not saying not pressing the brakes on summer programs. I think that's optimistic, but somewhere in here, as we creep up into June, we might have to say, and you guys might have already done it as a board, this isn't going to happen. And then we really have to take a sharp look at it, because I know the summer is some of your most, that's your revenue. A lot of your revenue comes from that time. So that's my concern. I think if we're looking at the general health of the town, we still have a very healthy reserve budget. We've been very disciplined, but that can dry up quickly if we get into a situation where we're draining hundreds of thousands of dollars into an enterprise. So I'm hoping that the state does come through with some of these bailout 0% type things that they were doing for other businesses. That would be huge. That's just my comments. Anyone else?
Cindy, do you mind if I?
No, not at all, Alicia.
Sorry. So I just want to be very clear about, so yes, the summer programs are definitely some of our biggest revenue that we have. I'm trying to think of how to, I don't feel that this is going to be something that is going to be a bigger issue going into past July. I would hope so. Maybe I'm being optimistic. But our summer camp program does not actually start until the first week of July. So, we're looking at the registrations that we're getting in now to be able to feed future, right? So hopefully the worst that could happen, hopefully, is that we would just have to cancel our spring 2 programs that haven't been converted to virtual programs. And hopefully we'll still be able to move forward with camp.
Thanks, Alicia. Anyone else on Finance Committee have any comments or questions for Alicia?
Cindy, this is Joe. I just want to make an announcement for any FinCom members, if they are out there and I haven't unmuted them, just to raise their hand in the participant list so I can make sure that I find them more easily. I think I got everyone.
And just as a reminder for anyone who's raising their hand, who's dialed in, that's *9.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Madam Chair, if I could follow up Gary's comment for a second. How do registrations look for this summer compared to a typical summer, Alicia?
They just
Oh, did I miss that part? I'm sorry. I'm bouncing around between things.
No, that's a great question. And I'm glad that you asked that. So typically we would have a majority of our summer programs already registered and filled by this point. March is our biggest month. So as of 2019, last year, we had about $198,000 in revenue just in that month alone. So that's our biggest month, which is unfortunately the height of when all of this pandemic started. So for this year, we only pulled in about $41,000. So that's the difference. Okay. I'm not a very big person for asking for help. That's me personally. So as of today, we actually put out a campaign to let individuals know that we really do need their support to get the camp programs to run. So within the past hour and a half, we've had 16 registrations. So, having that ask, I guess swallowing that pride helps a little bit. So the more that we can do that, the better. And to be able to get that information out there that, we really need the town to support us in this time so that we can support them when we get back to normalcy and they need that help.
Thank you. Apologies for making you repeat yourself.
No, that's okay. I didn't say that, so thanks.
Okay.
No, but I'm glad he asked. I was going to ask the same thing, but I have a follow-up question to that. So how much does a summer program scale itself? So if you end up with only 50% of the people signed up, is what you'd normally expect. I mean, is it really just a matter of you have less counselors, or are there other fixed costs in there that make it just doesn't work as well?
That's a really great question. I would say it really is going to depend on what the policy is going to be. So let's say that, it comes down through, because we are a licensed camp. So a lot of the policy is going to have to come from the Board of Health. So if they say that we have to reduce the number of kids and have more staff, then that might change things, right? Because currently our ratios are, if the kids are 7 and above, it's 10 kids to 1 counselor. And if they are 7 and below, we'll say then it's 5 kids to 1 counselor. So, that depends. We might have to keep the staff that we've got and lower the amount of numbers that we allow in. So yes, that could reduce the amount of revenue that we would get for camp. But I don't really have any answers. That's kind of, we're playing the what if game. We're not going to know until that regulation comes down from Board of Health.
Yeah, I was thinking more that likelihood, I could imagine, even if things are technically opened up, hopefully we're there. But if not, but a lot of people still aren't going to send their kids. Like, they're going to hold them at home, right? And keep them more sequestered for part of the summer if they can.
Right.
So I'm just thinking from that standpoint, given no other change in regulations, if you just have half as many people sign up, I mean, is the program sustainable then?
I'd have to crunch the numbers and let you know.
Yeah, I think those are the things we want to be looking at. I would think. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, if I could, Madam Chair, just one more point on that.
Certainly.
I think the concern that a lot of parents are going to have about sending their children into a public environment with a lot of other people isn't just going to go away. So that is an important aspect. But I think even a greater effect, if this ended, in June 1st, May 1st, is going to be the fact that there's going to be an enormous amount of the population still on unemployment or on some type of situation where they can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
And I did see that you had put out some information today of 0 down payments and things like that. Those are things probably to strategize forward, even if we have to do a payment plan through a year, because that's a population that is probably going to be the majority, even over the, if this thing clears up to some extent where we can run these programs.
Yep.
So that's, I would suggest probably the next, when you guys have meetings, if maybe we appoint a FinCom and a BOS rep to be on those meetings, just so we can kind of stay in the loop on some of these things that are as they coming down the road, because it's kind of like the stockholder. if we treat it as a stockholding type company, if we're starting to tip to this point of the general fund supporting the program, we're going to definitely need to keep our boards updated consistently on this, so we know how we're going to be able to support you the best.
Okay.
Right. Thanks, Gary. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Cindy, I'd like to speak briefly, if I may.
Sure, Sean.
Okay, I've been on the, just to, for people that might not be aware of all that Park and Rec does, they serve over 50% of the population. Currently, they had 536 members in the system, and that's a little over half of the town residents, give or take. So it's not the impact that Park and Rec has on the community as a whole. It's not insignificant. I've been on the commission for a couple of years now, give or take. I've always known Alicia and Tim to be very frugal and look after the money of the Park and Rec like it's their own. So I appreciate Alicia trying to be proactive in this and bring it to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, just to be proactive and get ahead of, obviously these challenging times which we all find ourselves in. Hopefully this will turn around. Alicia had said that the income prior to March, which is their biggest month, was, I think, Alicia, 20% above last year.
Yeah.
So it was trending upward. Hopefully, these are uncertain times, but hopefully by the summer things turn around somewhat, and we can hopefully try to climb out of this hole. What is particularly important to me is in this time of isolation and people being sequestered at their homes and the feeling of connection. And I don't know if anybody saw on Facebook that Park and Rec ran a parade, or what would you call it, Alicia?
Geez, I don't know. Driving the Easter Bunny around in a truck.
You had
great.
the Easter
That was
Bunny
awesome.
drive around town, and people on Facebook could give their addresses. And I think Alicia said they drove 70 miles for how many hours, Alicia?
Over 3. Yeah.
giving back to the community, making community, the children, the family members feel, connected and part of the town. So they really do strive to make Littleton a better place through their programming and their efforts. And I just wanted to commend them for that. I just wanted to make people that maybe weren't aware of what the Park and Rec Commission, the Park and Rec and Continuing Ed does, just make them aware of it. But they are a vital part, in any support that we could get to keep them less in the red would be appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. I think we all agree we value the Park and Rec Commission and the Park and Rec Department, know what they do for the community. I stumbled upon the Easter Bunny parade. It was really cute. That was a great idea. Such a nice pick-me-up for the community. So thank you for putting that together. So I believe at this time that you're going to circle back with Cheryl and review your numbers more closely, Alicia, and then come back
Yep.
with us. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention at this time. It's a difficult situation for everybody, and especially on the municipal side with what's going on with the pandemic and the impacts it's going to have on the community. So I appreciate you taking the time to put together this summary and bringing this to our attention now.
Yep.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
And just one follow-up item on this would be Gary's suggestion with regard to a BOS member and a FinCom member, if we wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah, I don't know how often the board meets. I just think it would be good to be able to come back to our boards, just so we're not, or maybe we just meet more like this, if that's something that makes sense, just so we can, because this is one of those things, no matter how hard we work at all the other departments, we have a very robust park and recreation program, and it's driven by the enterprise fund for that, with us supporting it. And if this becomes a, even a greater support effort on our behalf, we have to be aware of that, because we're going to have to potentially make cuts in other areas to support that program. We just don't want to get into a situation where we're going to have to dip into, our stabilizations and reserves to support an enterprise. That's all. That was my fear. And that's like a scenario that I hope and I don't think is going to happen, but just something we have to, I didn't think a lot of things would happen. So.
Right. Great. Thanks, Gary. Okay, so I don't know that we need to appoint somebody at this time. I think we'll wait for you to follow up with Cheryl and then come back with us with some more detailed information, Alicia.
We do have a park commission meeting tomorrow night.
Okay.
And, we've worked with Betsy in the past for FinCom. So if you're available and you're willing, you're more than welcome to come to our meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. And yeah, if anybody from the Board of Selectmen wants to, attend as well, you're more than welcome.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on to item 2B, discuss potential revisions to the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget.
Great, thank you, Cindy. So based off the Board of Selectmen meeting last night and at their request to develop some revenue scenarios for what we might be facing for FY21, I prepared a memo where I outlined 3 different potential revenue scenarios that we could be looking at, along with some recommendations on how we potentially could resolve those revenue scenarios. One thing I did want to point out as well, which I did mention in the memo, while right now I don't think that this is something we have to be concerned with for FY21, but could be something in 2022, 23, 24 we have to keep our eye on, is tax collections. As Chuck had mentioned actually earlier in this, this meeting. And so if we end up dropping to a level of tax collections, which we did during the recession, that would affect our free cash at this point by about $1 million. So I just caveat that with, and I start the memo speaking to that so that as we think about decisions that you might want to make for FY21, you have that as kind of a backdrop that could be occurring in future years.
Okay.
And so as such, that created the baseline for my budget recommendations. As you'll notice, something with consistency throughout all three of them. When I looked at where I would recommend making budget reductions, it was around staffing. So not current staffing, just new staffing adds in each scenario. So the first scenario that I presented in the memo has our new growth dipping down to what it was in the recession in 2008, as well as reductions to state aid, room and meal tax, licenses and permits, and motor vehicle excise. And the second scenario, I took out the new growth, but still has a state aid reduction, meal tax reduction, room reduction, license and permits, and motor vehicle. And then same thing for revenue scenario 3, just by different percents. I can step through my recommendations, or I can open it up for questions, whichever you choose.
Could I recommend that we unmute school committee chair? I know I've had several discussions with him, and he might have some information during this session as well. All right.
There we go.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Cheryl, do you want to run through your recommendations as a starting point?
Sure, happy to. So in the first revenue scenario, we have a potential revenue deficit to resolve of about $1.1 million. And so the reductions to the budget that I'm recommending are a list of FTE additions for FY21. Cemetery, collector, conservation, EHS, elections, highway, library, police, town administration, town clerk, 2 school positions, facilities director, and the HR assistant. That is a savings about $460,000. I'm also recommending that we eliminate education and professional development and employee recognition. That's in the HR budget. That's $45,000. I have a reduction to the school budget by $250,000. And I have reducing the finance committee reserve, which is a savings of $130,000. And I have rescinding the approval of the following capital items: the accounting, chart of accounts, the field irrigation, parking lot sealer, highway truck with the plow, Shaker Lane school phone, classroom door replacement, and the 3rd floor town hall inspectional services. That's a total savings of $247,500. I'm also recommending that we continue if we go with that scenario, we continue with the budget freeze for FY21 as we roll into the fall. Scenario number 2, the revenue deficit to resolve is $786,000. The FTE additions that I suggest we eliminate is the cemetery, collector, conservation, EHS, elections, finance assistant, highway, library, town admin intern, town clerk, 2 part-time school positions, and the HR assistant. That's a savings of $253,000 thereabout. Same thing, eliminate the education and professional development. In this scenario, it has a reduction of the school budget by $200,000, and it has a reduction of the finance committee reserve as well. It also has rescinding the chart of accounts, the field irrigation, the police parking lot sealer, the Shaker Lane phone school, and the 3rd floor inspectional services portion, which again is a savings of $153,500. The revenue scenario 3, which is the one that I'm recommending that the Board of Selectmen consider, because I think it's the most realistic scenario that we might face in FY21, has a revenue deficit of $529,000. The personnel changes are for cemetery, collector, conservation, EHS, elections, finance assistant, highway, library, town admin intern, town clerk, and the school part-time HR admin. That's a savings of $200,000. I still have a reduction on the education and employee recognition and professional development budget, but it's a little bit less. It's not quite at the same level. In this scenario, I have reducing the school budget by $130,000. And in this scenario, I have rescinding the accounting chart of accounts, the field irrigation, the parking lot sealer, Shaker Lane school phone, and the third floor inspectional services for a savings of $153,000 of capital items.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for putting this together.
You're welcome.
For us, it's very helpful the way you've broken it down. I'm going to open it up to questions or comments from the board. I'll start with FinCom to begin this time. And then also I would like to hear from Mike Fontenelle as well.
Yeah, we've met in little working groups, of course, to discuss some of this and strategize with Cheryl. And I think, and even after talking with the schools, with Mike, I think number 3 is the right choice right now. I'm not saying that this couldn't balloon itself into something really catastrophic for the town, but number 3 is conservative, yet it still preserves our current staff, and it doesn't interfere, with any buildup that we've had in our reserve funds that we would still have in a situation if we have to make those determination later on, if we needed to tap into that. So I think our biggest worry is obviously FTEs are the biggest expense to our town. So getting in front of this, unfortunately, it's a difficult decision, but I think it's the right one to address those. I think the schools, I'll let Mike speak a little bit to that. We've spoken, though they weren't quite as heavy FTE driven this budget session, because they didn't have a great need that they wanted to present to this year's budget for FTEs, where the rest of the town did, because we had been flat for so long. So I think they are going to have to potentially make some serious decisions on other aspects of their budget and where they can get this money from. So we're going to have to watch that closely in coming months if we decide to go, with this number 3 determination, or any of them, A, B, or C, 1, 2, or 3, because their cuts aren't going to come necessarily from the FTEs. They're going to come from other pieces that we might really want to look at and see if that's something that we are willing to do or not do as a board. So we have to stay on that closely. And I don't know, Mike, if you had anything you wanted to say regarding that, where you're such a large portion of our budget.
Right. The biggest challenge for me at the moment is that the school committee as a whole has not had a chance to meet and debate these different scenarios. There's no question that there's a lot of value in having these types of scenarios presented to us. And we definitely see the value in that. But Gary's right. I mean, the initial proposed budget was heavy on new FTEs for a lot of on the town side, and we were fully supportive of that. And removing them seems like the right thing to do, because it's money that we haven't incurred in the budget yet. My concern, after having some discussions with Gary and Cheryl, is that we make sure that the cuts that might be required on the school side protect us from, not having to make any staff reductions or service, provision of services to the community. And we just haven't had a chance to look at this in enough depth to be able to confidently understand that it will or won't. I don't think it'll take us a long time to make that determination, but we just need a little bit of time. we've moved our public budget hearing again because we've moved town meeting yet again. We're not scheduled to meet for our public budget hearing until April 30th. So we have plenty of time to process this. And what I'd like to suggest is that I be given the opportunity to get with the rest of the school committee, figure this out, get back to Gary and the finance committee. And if there needs to be some more negotiation on what we're comfortable with, we can get that done before April 30th and certainly before town meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Are there any comments from the Board of Selectmen?
Well, I think Cheryl has explained this very well, and as Gary indicated a moment ago, some of us had a chance to talk with this in the subgroup meeting on Friday, and I think she's got us in the right path, with options, and obviously it's something that's going to be a bit of a moving target until at least early June before town meeting, before we have to settle on some hard options. But I'm in support.
Great, thanks, Paul.
I'll say, Cindy, that I'm in support of the goal in scenario 3 as a budget objective to figure out how much pain we need to absorb. I have some questions about how we reach that $530,000, particularly with respect to, looks like in scenario 3 we have the facilities position included in there. And I think we need to talk about whether we want that facilities position, or how, if we didn't want that facilities position, how we would reallocate that $125,000, whether that's on the town side to staffing increases in other departments, whether that's on the school side. I think there's some places where we could fine tune scenario 3 and how we reach that 530. But as a scenario, as a goal to strive for, I think it makes sense.
I didn't see facilities in scenario 3.
Well, that's because it's a limited, right, because scenario 3, what's listed is what's being eliminated as additions, which means the facilities is not eliminated as an addition. So
I'm reading it backwards. I see what you're saying.
And similarly, I think scenario 3
Yeah.
also includes, correct me if I'm wrong here, Cheryl, we've got 2 police officers in scenario 3.
That's correct.
What other full-time additions do we retain in scenario 3?
Can I screen share, Joe?
Yeah, you open it up. Or...
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yep.
So this was the chart that was in the original, all the budget materials that we received with the initial FY21 budget. And so the column I, initial recommendation, has your initial recommendations. And then as you move to the right, what's highlighted is what's actually staying in each scenario. So you can see the HR administrator and 1 police officer is included as an add for revenue scenario 1. In scenario 2, we add the 2nd police officer. And then in revenue scenario 3, the admin assistant. The facilities director is not on here because that was already a budget in the FY20 budget, and it wasn't a new, add for FY21.
But it is something you took out in scenario 1, is that right?
It is, yep,
Okay.
you are correct. It is something I took out in scenario 1 because it was, my thought process at this point is that that individual had not been hired
Right.
yet, and so it was still a position that was available to be able to be potentially cut if you so choose, or held off on.
I would lean more towards that. This is Chuck, because for the most part, scenario 3 is cuts that really avoid new spending, and that in fact would be new spending. Although it was budgeted, we haven't, it's not an actual number.
Correct.
To your point, we don't have somebody on staff that would have to say, sorry, we're going to have to cut you. So I tend to agree with you, Chase, there that that's something that should be very much on the table for scenario 3.
And that gets us half of the way. I mean, if we just wanted to use that and reallocate it back to the town side, that gets us halfway to the FTE additions that are cut. So I'm not saying we necessarily have to do that, but it's a big chunk of change.
Right.
I agree. Okay. Are there any other comments or questions regarding Cheryl's presentation? Alan?
Yeah, good evening. I've been listening to everybody. I've read over Cheryl's recommendations. I'm really concerned that we're not being as cautious in our approach as we should be. It's most probable that the economic fallout from this crisis is going to be much worse than we could now imagine. In scenario 1, my recommendation is that we suspend all new FTE hiring until we get a better picture of what the economic situation is going to be about. You know, and I know that it's much easier to add staff than it is to cut staff. I think we need to make a look at down the road to see, get a more educated look. Maybe at fall town meeting, we could look at some of these FTEs and add them back in then. But I just don't want to underestimate what's going to happen. I don't agree with Cheryl's estimation of the state budget cuts are being 5%. Federal and state governments are spending money hand over fist during this crisis, and I don't think the money is just flat going to be there. I see we're going to have a bigger cut in state aid, both for general government and also for schools. I can't comment on school spending, but my experience tells me that we'll spend more. The increase is likely to be more than to be less. Nobody knows what it's going to be. School's going to be like come next year. I have a feeling that online education is probably costing more than regular school would cost. If online education continues to go, we'll no doubt have to provide all the computers, all the hardware, and everything else for students. And who knows what the mandate is going to come down from the state on the state education division. I guess what I really want to say is don't spend more than the absolutely necessary in FY 2021 because the uncertainty of the economic situation for FY 22 and 23 is just totally unknown.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. So moving forward, next steps, Mike, you said that the school committee's they have a meeting coming up and you would like time to review this?
We haven't posted anything yet, but we will discuss posting a meeting tomorrow, posting probably for, I would say early next week, probably by Monday of next week. That'll give us time to post a meeting and time for us to do our analysis and be prepared to have a productive meeting. So by next Monday, we should be able to come back with a consensus from the school committee as to what our support is in general for what's being proposed. And then we can work with Cheryl and Gary to see how that affects their analysis.
Okay.
Just procedurally, from a timing standpoint, in order to get the budget into the warrant itself and into the town meeting report, we would need to have decided upon all the details by no later than May 18th at our May 18th meeting, just to put everything on everyone's radar. And I mean, there's certainly, if there was an adjustment that needed to be made after May 18th, it could obviously be done through the town meeting report updates. that is put out at town meeting. But I think heavy discussion or good, healthy discussion at the May 4th meeting would be ideal, with a decision and a finalization on the budget at the May 4th meeting would be ideal, because that would allow all of us the opportunity to make sure that we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's at the May 18th meeting, and then be able to publish the warrant and the town meeting report the following day on May 19th, pursuant to the town meeting timeline, which backs into all the other dates that we are required to meet by bylaw.
Okay. Thank you, Nina. Does anyone, Gary, how do you feel about that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, just from the last month, it appears like May 18th is a lifetime away, right? So thinking of the things that can happen between now and then, it seems like every day something hits you and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that, or I didn't think that would happen, both within families, to the community, to state, to federal level. So I think May 4th, it could be a very different picture. And I may come back and sit here with my arm around Alan and say, well, I won't, I'll be at distance, but I'll say, absolute, Alan, I think you're right. We probably need to really look at that first proposal, or maybe even think out of the box and get more creative. I mean, this is really Cheryl trying to do her best to appease, come up with these great ideas based on what? Previous analysis of a recession in 2008, which this could be worse than. We don't know. We put a lot of financial policy in place since then. So we are protected. If everything went wrong, we'd be protected for quite a while. We don't want to start utilizing that resource yet to dip into those stabilizations. So I think I'm not going to say no to what Alan's, or even disagree with him, because he may be right. And I think we might, in 2-3 weeks, we might have a better, idea of what we're facing. And I know in 6 months we will. I wish we had more time for some of this, so we really maybe need to look harder at capital type things that we can live without. FTEs not hiring a replacement for our finance, or for Anne is a big deal. We have to have that position filled. That's not something. Right. So there are critical positions at any level we have to make sure that we fill for continuity of our municipality. So we'll have to definitely look harder at this over the next couple of weeks. And I'm glad we do have a month. We might use every minute of it to get this, hopefully, to make the best decisions we can.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Gary. Okay, Mike, so you'll schedule your meeting and we'll plan on circling back and going over all of this information and numbers again on May 4th.
Yep.
With the Board of Selectmen, FinCom, and you'll follow up with Cheryl as well after your meeting with the school committee, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
We're probably going to adjourn our meeting, Cindy, if you're going to continue on with the agenda. I don't think there's anything else left for FinCom unless somebody wants to stay on. I'll watch you guys on TV.
Okay.
The only thing I would suggest, if there is an update, and this is more of a question for Chase or Paul, if there is an update with regard to 119 Tahadawan.
Looked like Chase had the more recent conversation, so perhaps he has something.
Joe, I believe that Rob Ansell's on the call as well. He wanted to be unmuted for this, please.
Joe responded yes, he just happens to be on mute.
Okay.
There we go. Okay.
All right, there he is.
Hey, Rob.
Hi.
Hi. Is Chase talking? I can't hear him.
Yes, I was talking, but I was muted.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
There's not a ton to update on, but I did want to bring the board, and since we have FinCon here, up to speed on kind of where we're at with that. Things essentially stalled. Once this COVID-19 stuff hit, we slammed on the brakes. And essentially what I want to ask the board for tonight is direction with respect to managing that prospective purchase. I think based on everything that we heard tonight, it's abundantly clear that we're not going to spend any money out of the general fund to acquire that piece of property. However, as the board and FinCom has heard, CPC has a certain amount of money available dedicated for open space that could be utilized to acquire that property. Similarly, the Conservation Commission has a certain amount of money from the Oak Hill Cell Tower Fund that could be used to acquire that. However, before I went down that path to work with CPC to figure out to get their temperature on using those funds without any general fund, as well as Conscom using some of their funds, I wanted to make sure that the Board of Selectmen, and since we have FinCom was generally on board with feeling out and understanding what those options might look like. Not necessarily committing anyone to anything, but reevaluating our financing options to acquire it.
Okay, thanks, Chase. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess, there are things we can work on in talking to folks at SVT and, exploring the state options in addition to the, basically what we talked about before the whole coronavirus hit, with the notable exception, as Chase correctly pointed out, that I don't think it's realistic to have a model in there that anticipates town funding. But, to the extent that people are out there working via Zoom or email, we can probably pursue either the state program that we're being directed toward, or get, flesh out the community preservation possibilities, and stay on track to be able to give some sort of update to the sellers, as we had discussed before, which I think was sometime later in the spring, early summer.
Okay.
They're basically giving money away.
Who is?
I'm saying if we had to bond some of that, we talked about bonding for that.
Right.
And
right.
If you look at the rates right now, it is, if the town is serious about purchasing that piece of land, and it looks like there's great enough support for it. I think the number was pretty ridiculous. I think if we looked at bonding that out over 10 years, and the interest was going to be something like $1,200. I mean,
that might even be the best approach to utilizing the community preservation money. Just kind of hit their projected revenue stream as a payback on a bond, rather than especially if there's not really any considerable interest involved, rather than just hitting up their cash funds and wiping them out. So you're right, Gary. We shouldn't lose sight of that piece of it. But I think the real thing that we don't know much about, but the Sudbury Valley trustees folks, Krista anyway from there, seems bullish about, is that we're it's the type of property that one of those state programs is geared towards and is funded towards. And I believe the application period was supposed to be sometime in April. Chase, does that sound right? It's probably been extended based on.
Yeah, it's all been thrown in the air like a deck of cards. But
right.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Paul. Rob, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yes, this is Rob Ansel speaking. I represent the Brown family. I've been involved with discussions with the town of Littleton now for approximately 2.5 years as to where the property is and where we are going with the property. The Brown family really wants to sell the property to the town of Littleton. They would love to be able to explore a number of different ways to finance this, that even consider taking a mortgage back on the property. I don't think that that's possible from a finance standpoint, but my clients are very much interested in selling the property to the town, but there's been one issue after another as to big things coming in the town of Littleton, between the new town hall, COVID-19, a senior center, and other things. So I do not have an ultimatum to the town. I'm not saying that discussions are ending. We're not saying that we are shutting down discussions, but I really need some either a committee or a single person contact or something that's going to help us put our arms around this. And as of yet, we don't have that. My clients are willing to sell the property less than its appraised value. They're willing to, and they have now extended for a total of 4 town meetings and waiting for various things to come together. They really do want to sell it to the town. It's very important to them and their family's legacy that they pass on the property to the town. It couldn't be any more environmentally significant for that area. It's ideal as to creating a habitat corridor amongst other things. Every person that I've talked to in the town of Littleton has expressed interest in preserving this parcel. We need to get our arms around where we're going to go, which is not, again, is not a threat, but at some point, town of Littleton's going to miss an opportunity to buy this beautiful property. And I have clients that are motivated and have showed that they're motivated by continuing to stay in this process. And we've all been decimated by this COVID-19 thing. I know that as far as dedicated funds goes with the Community Preservation Act, that's not your general operating budget. There may also be some funds available through Sudbury Valley trustees and some other state funds, but who knows where those are going to be. But we are really seeking some form of an agreement to see if we can be on the same page. And I'm asking that either Nina or a member of the Board of Selectmen assumes the responsibility of moving this forward so that we can get our arms around it. Once again, it's not a threat, but at some point, I'm confident that the Brown brothers are going to say, sorry, Littleton, we tried for a really long time to get this together and it didn't happen. The 3 brothers that are the owners of the property live on the left coast, 2 in Oregon and 1 in California, and their only remaining ties to Littleton is this property. And it's a beautiful parcel of land, it truly is. And I've seen the residential development that's happened in my hometown for the last couple of years. I think that a lot of that is super positive, but Littleton doesn't have a lot of open space. This would be a great property for the town to own. So what I'm asking for the town is to say, can we designate one person that is going to be in control of that process and see if we can end up coming up with an agreement?
Well, and maybe there, Madam Chair, if I can jump in, one
Sure.
of the first affirmative step that we should take there, and Betsy, I may need you to help me understand the CPC application process. It's a 2-step process. And perhaps if the board is willing, we could at least go through the first step, and I can't recall what it's called, but it's essentially a request for determination. Will the CPC, does the project that we're looking to fund fit within the criteria of the CPC requirements, which I think it obviously does, but we need to go through that first before we request money.
That's correct.
The chair, is that correct, Betsy?
That's correct. That's a process, right? I mean, it's not an owner's process. I mean, you just have to go talk to them and submit there's a form and so on, but it's not, it's just a matter of when they're going to meet next and so on.
And I've already been into CPC to brief them on this. So I think the board could vote tonight to prepare an application with CPC to initiate that process.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. And before a motion, though, I'd just like to clarify. I can appreciate the frustration, Attorney Ansel, that there isn't a deal in place now. But if anything, you've certainly had identified members of the board Chase primarily, but myself secondarily, and Nina's been involved in a number of calls with you and the client. We haven't been able to put a proposal together. First stumbling block by our own internal protocols was the necessity of getting a appraisal done, which was maddeningly longer than I think it should have taken. But we had conversations with you just a couple of weeks ago where we outlined, timeline and the various options and where we were going to go on this. So I don't think the characterization that you haven't had a single person to talk to is really accurate. I think, we've had people to talk to, we just haven't had the answers for you just yet, although I think we've been pretty open about where we intend to get them from, and we're fully understanding that if you need to go elsewhere, well then, do so. But we are interested, and we think we've got some real possibilities there. If we can show furtherance of that by voting to authorize initiating the process with CPC, that's fine too, but that just formalizes something that Chase has already initiated by meeting with them and pursuing that verbally. So, we're already walking in that direction.
Well, I didn't mean to say what I tried to say, is I want a single point of contact moving forward. I know that Chase is not running for re-election, and I'm looking for a single person point of contact. Just so you know, I didn't mean to imply that the town hasn't been responsive to me. You personally have been responsive to me, as has Nina. We've had, changes in town administrators, and we've had a lot of changes in the town. We've had a number of different issues that have come up. So I feel as though from the Brown side, we've tried to move this forward, and it hasn't got the traction that we want. And now we are up against to listen to this call tonight. I can't thank the people enough that are on this call, many of them that I grew up with. It scares the heck out of me how bad our economy is. And now, we are looking to put something together to preserve land for many generations to come. I think that the only kind of saving things with this is that we have Community Preservation Act funds. We may have some other state funds that have already been dedicated to open space preservation. And I am very confident that this is a perfect property to preserve with a very willing, reasonable seller. So I don't want this opportunity to fall down, but I also feel like if I don't have a single person, meaning one person to talk to that is designated by the board or otherwise to say, okay, this is where we're going to go with this, so that if we have issues that come up with town council, that we can get things together and circle back to the Board of Selectmen to make sure
Well,
that
you may not have heard the good news, but we postponed the election until June, so Chase isn't able to get away as quick as he wanted to. So you've got him around at least until, what is it, June 20th, and
June 20th.
And this may cause you to wince, but in the absence, you at least have me until the board appoints somebody else if they chose to do so. And as you pointed out, Nina is always good about getting back to you, but we're not going to leave you in the lurch and just leave nobody in charge of the process.
But what I guess what I'm looking for is to say, I don't know why we can't get an agreement signed that makes it subject to financing approvals, town meeting, other things, so that we know that we're at least on the same page as to the Board of Selectmen. And if we reach that and fall town meeting, we have a gap of funding that we're unable to satisfy through various sources, and we're certainly not going to get that from the general fund, then my clients have a decision as to whether or not they're going to wait for a future town meeting to see if the economy gets better, or they're going to go with the developer route.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. So going forward at this
Well,
point.
I'd just like, on that point, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
No, not at all.
We had a call, what is it, about a month ago, Chase, Rob, Chase, Nina, when we talked on that very point. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chase, I think our position was we wouldn't be opposed to advocating that once we fleshed out where we stood with CPC, SVT, and the state funding, which we were giving ourselves the time frame then of like April, May to figure out. That probably extends into June. And either by then we have our act, we can present something that the selectmen and the finance committee to say, we'd like you to support X, subject to, the approvals of town meeting in the fall, and either they back it or not, and you'll have your answer by then. But I haven't heard anything that's coronavirus notwithstanding, and I haven't heard anything that suggests we're off of that trajectory. Chase, would you like to?
Yeah, I think what we could do here is essentially implement what we had talked about. So
Right.
to bring everybody up to speed, we had talked about perhaps putting an agreement together for the board to consider that had certain milestones that the board needed to reach. For example, a milestone might be applying for funding from the CPC. And that agreement would achieve two things. The first would be it would put us on a very particular and very specific schedule to address the seller's concerns. The other would be that it would give the sellers a certain amount of certainty with respect to whether the town was going to get off the pots or not, so to speak. So I think that's still a reasonable course forward. We haven't put that particular agreement together because of the COVID-19 stuff, but applying for the money with CPC and getting that process started, whether or not we have an agreement that requires that, is a very logical first step. And in the process, we've also continued to engage SVT and sought out funds there. So those are some of the major milestones we talked about, and I don't think that that's any different than what we talked about before. It's just a matter of memorializing it into an agreement and putting that in front of the board for consideration.
Okay, thank you, Chase. So we were scheduled to hold a public hearing at 7, and I know that we skipped over agenda item number 3, so we're going to have to circle back and revisit that. And we do have a question from the audience, but
Yes.
just to finalize this topic right now. So what is the plan? Do you want to circle back and come up?
I'd like two things, Cindy. One would be if I needed a motion to authorize an initial application with the CPC for funding that commits the town to doing nothing yet, but it gets the process started. So I'd like approval to do that, whether that requires a motion or not, I don't know. And the second is a general agreement that we can, as we've been doing, work out something with the sellers to put in front of the board with respect to a timeline and essentially a purchase and sale agreement with conditions, so that we can all take a look at what that would look like. I don't think that requires a motion. That's consistent with what we've been doing before.
Okay.
So Cindy, can I jump in? Because
Sure.
I was muted, and apologize for the background noise. But so way back when Gary made a comment about the cost of money right now, it's very true. But frankly, we had some conversations very early on that we would take a look at this property if and when we were able to get CPC money, some money from resources like Sudbury Valley trustees and other sources other than the general fund. So for us to go out and borrow money for the purchase of this land is not something that I'd be in favor of supporting, and I don't think that that's where we should be using our money. We just finished up a whole conversation about cutting very real positions and potentially employees. So I'm not if we're talking about buying this with funds that are earmarked specifically for purchasing, whether it be for purchasing open space and conservation land, that kind of thing, I'm okay with it. But I don't think that regardless of what the cost of money is, to take on more debt right now without knowing what the future holds. Fact is that, to Alan's point earlier, the economy, we don't know what the economy is going to do. It could in fact tank. And Cheryl alluded to the 2008-2009 real estate crisis. That could very well happen. And the appraised value that we end up purchasing at could be way above what the market value is. And I'm not saying that that is the case, but it very, very possibly could be the case. So I think that all of the suggestions Chase had are very much in line. But I don't think that we need to go down the road of making any hard and fast decisions today without the funding sources in place.
Yeah, I understood, Chuck. To clarify one point, the borrowing that we were talking about is borrowing against bonding. CPC would bond the purchase within their open space fund. So it wouldn't be borrowing against the general fund. They've got plus or minus $500,000, but it may be more prudent giving borrowing rates to bond against that rather than use the capital that's sitting in the fund.
Okay.
But I'm in no way talking about bonding against anything in the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, the points about the economy still come into play. However.
Right, if I could, Madam Chair, that was more, we're going to know a lot more by November. We're talking about a November town meeting for this. So I think that the seller, if they know that this is going to be on our November ballot to some degree, that should be our timeline. The timeline's built right there. And the borrowing, I was only presenting that as an option. Once we look at CPC, Sudbury Valley Trust, and all these other maybe fundraising things, what are we left with? That's much more palatable than purchasing it based on an entire borrowing. We might be left with only a few $100,000 that we have to, go with almost a 0% loan, which is not the worst thing if we're talking about a significant piece of property that the town values. That's where I was going from a funding perspective. That's all. So,
thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. So I don't know that we need a motion, Chase, for the CPC application. I'm not certain. Nina, do you think that we do?
I think
Consensus.
Yeah, I think
No
consensus would be helpful.
Okay. Okay. Chase, do you want to give it a try?
Betsy, can you help me remember what the title of that first application is? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Good.
I move that the Board of Selectmen file an initial application for the acquisition of 119 Tehadawon Road funds from CPC.
Yeah, it's really, you're not even asking for funds. You're just asking for a,
Determination.
oh gosh, what is the name of it?
I think it's determination.
Thank you. Yeah. It's just determination of eligibility is really what it is.
Then I amend my motion to reflect a determination of eligibility, not a request for funds.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? It's a roll call vote. Chuck?
Aye.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And I'm going to abstain from the vote because I work for Perkins and Ansel, so I'm not going to take a position on the vote. So the vote is 3 in favor and 1 abstain. So we'll proceed with submitting that application as stated. And I think we had one question.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
Thank
Rob.
you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
We have one question, I think, from someone in the audience, so to speak. Joe, if you could unmute Christine Nordhaus, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping to wait, to get in a little earlier. I wanted to urge the board strongly to enter into some formal declaration of intent for this property. I am a trustee of the Littleton Conservation Trust, but I don't speak on their behalf. I speak as a mother and a resident of Littleton. Nothing has been more important during this COVID-19 pandemic than Littleton's conservation lands. They're more valuable and precious than anything, and they're all we have right now. So I think that if the Brown family needs some written declaration of your true intent to bring this before the town meeting, I strongly urge you to do that. I think that it's letting this property go without having the people of Littleton voice their opinions on whether or not to purchase it would be a very sorry shame. And so that was it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Christine. All right, so we are past the time frame. We were supposed to have a public hearing opened at 7 p.m. And then we will, excuse me, Chuck?
Continuation.
Opening.
opening the public hearing on the soil removal permit. Okay, so
Let's see.
should read the hearing notice, or Chase, do you want to read it?
I can read it as soon as I get to that page. Yeah.
We're
Do you have a
gonna,
motion ready? It'll be pulled up on the screen, I'm sure, in a moment. You can
we're gonna
wait.
adjourn. We're gonna
hearing.
adjourn our meeting as a FinCom.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
All right, thank you
I'm
guys.
going to read it,
Okay.
Chase. I got it.
Thank you very much. I move to open the earth removal hearing related to 9 Air Road and waive the reading of the hearing notice.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, roll call vote. Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Chuck? Cindy? And I'm in favor. Okay, great. So we are now in session with the earth removal hearing for 9 Air Road. And I wanted to invite the applicant's attorney, Jennifer Platt, I believe, is on the call, if she wanted to proceed and present the application on behalf of the developer.
Good evening, members. Thank you very much for having us back this evening. I think it might be helpful just to give a little recap of some of the history that we talked about last week. Again, I'm Jennifer Platt from Anderson Krieger here on behalf of Field Development. The property that we're talking about is 9 Air Road. It's about 5¼ acres. It was approved for a 3-house lot development by the planning board back in September of last year. As you know, under the town earth removal bylaws, you are permitted to remove earth materials from a site in connection with a building permit. And the applicant was proceeding under an existing relocation permit and demolition permit to do some of the initial site prep. When we went in for the building permit for the first house, we were told that we needed to come in front of this board for approval under the earth removal bylaws before they would issue the building permit. As you know, to the site plan that you have in front of you, which shows all 3 lots and the proposed development there, shows the elevations. This is the plan that we worked with Conservation Commission, DEP, Mass Highway to get approvals. And you'll see there's been some iterations of that going through the plan to get their approval. There's a fair amount of work that needs to be done on this site to make it accessible from the road, to install foundations, to install septic, to get this ready to go. Clearly, it's not nearly as extensive as work that has gone on other sites in town. And as you know, earth removal permits have not been required historically. As far as we know, I don't think any have been issued, maybe but one in about the last 15 years. Be that as it may, I know that some projects have gotten approval through the planning board or some sort of limitations on their site work. And I mean, that's understandable. I mean, the project we're proposing, it's 3 residential lots or 3 residential homes. These are all conforming. Each lot, this was an A&R plan, each lot is conforming. So it doesn't need any relief from planning board or ZBA to go forward. We were able, with your consent and your help last week, to get the building permits for those 3 houses, and work is continuing on site. There, I do want to let you know we have Onyx is our contractor who is removing earth materials from the site. There is a scale on site, and that is best practices, so we can ensure that any truck that is taking materials off the property is compliant and is not going to overburden the roads. We had originally had access off the property through a shared driveway that's no longer being used. We're accessing directly onto 2A from the front of the property. That's one of the driveways that's shown on the plan that we are putting in and using. That access and the truck routes have been approved by Mass Highway. As you know, we do have some requirements from in terms of state building codes, the grade coming up, the driveways have a limited grade that they need to comply with. And that's one of the reasons that earth needs to be removed. Also, it's part of the overall design to ensure that we have the best drainage on the site and that the site works as a comprehensive building site. Given that the building inspector and this board had asked that we make an application for earth removal, we have made a submission. I believe you have all of those materials. And I would say that currently we are limiting operation on site to between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays, as is stipulated by the bylaws. Even before, even if we didn't need to comply with them, we did ask in the application also to have limited hours on Saturday. The access again is going straight onto State Road and then onto 495 State Highway. So there's no traffic going through residential neighborhoods. We do have a residential neighbor to one side. We also have industrial neighbor to the other side. And as you know, there are much heavier users in town. Our friends at the Point, for example, have, as part of their development, and again, a much bigger development taken off over a number of years. What I understand is in excess of 700,000 cubic yards of earth as part of their development. So what we'd like the board to do this evening is to approve our permit. I think we're going to be one of the, as you know, one of the first in town to have it. We do have, we've been meticulous about making sure we comply with all the state and federal regs in terms of work that's being done on site. And of course, plan to continue to do so. And again, we'd love to be able to get your support so we can continue with this project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take comments from the board regarding on the application. I'd like to hear with from the building commissioner as well if he has any comments. And then I'm going to assume that there are some abutters on the call who would also like to be heard. So I'm going to begin with the Board of Selectmen if you have any comments or questions regarding the application before us.
I'll say that I'd prefer to hear from the building inspector and the abutters before I make my comments.
Okay. That's fine.
I feel the same way, Cindy, but thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. Mr. Mullen?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. M&M Development originally came into my office, well, before it was my office, and was granted a building permit to relocate an existing barn on site. They went through the process of getting their approvals from the Conservation Commission. They did get their building permit for relocation. In time, the building, the barn was not relocated, it was demolished. They were unsuccessful in relocating it. At that time, the building permit would have been invalidated because it was no longer a relocation permit, but a demo permit, which would have then been closed. So we voided the building permit and sent them to you for a soil removal permit. In the interim, from our last meeting, we discussed issuing 3 building permits for the A&R for the 3 lots, which I have done. They now have 3 building permits for that site for the A&R that was provided to them by the planning board. I did also issue the demo permit for the original structure back in January, I believe. And that one has since been completed and closed. So this is where we are today. The soil removal bylaw allows them, to do a significant cut. With a building permit, they're allowed to do incidental removal of earth for the structures to be built.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question of the commissioner?
Sure.
While he's up, Mr. Mullen, where were the developers proposing to move that barn to? Because there's no other footings or anything on the property? Do you?
They would have been, so on the original application that I reviewed before we issued the stop work order, it looked like it was going to be on the rearest portion of the, what I would call the third lot, or the lot to the left, if you're looking at it from Air Road.
All the way to the back towards Sleigh Ride Lane is where it's proposed on the plans, but there weren't any footings or any foundation or anything poured there prior to them trying to relocate.
Correct. There was no foundation installed.
So they were going to relocate it to no place, basically. If it hadn't demolished and they were able to relocate it, they had no place to put it.
So that's one scenario. In my experience, buildings have been relocated, temporarily supported until the foundation was set. So there's options there.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone else on the board have any questions for Mr. Mullen? Okay, so we'll turn it over to the abutters if any are on the call. They would like
Madam
to.
Chair, this is Madam Chair, this is Joe. If you wouldn't mind if I asked a question first of the abutters?
Sure.
If any abutters, because it's hard for me to see through a list of 36 people, could use the raise their hand function. That way we can identify you and we can let you speak in an orderly fashion.
Joe, if I could ask that you, I believe town council's on the line. Maybe,
Yes, town council is on the line as well.
so maybe we could just make sure that he's unmuted in the event, or he or she is unmuted just in the event that they have comments.
Chris is on the line. He looks unmuted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So do you want to call on the individuals that have raised their hand, Joe, or would you like me to do it?
Right now, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hands, but
We've had two at least that I've seen.
I see Carrie
Miss Johnston and Miss Fife.
Okay, for some reason it's not showing up on mine, so.
Okay. So I saw Carrie's hand go up first, so maybe we could unmute Carrie.
Sure,
Perfect.
there we go.
Carrie, if you could just begin, clearly we can see your name, but just provide your address as well, please.
For 5 Sleigh Ride Lane.
Sure.
Actually, 2 houses over from where it's all happening.
Okay, go ahead.
It's just, it's been very disappointing of how this has all transpired, quite honestly. There's 25 little children in this neighborhood that are constantly out on bikes and whatever it may be, and us parents are always out there, but, the amount of heavy equipment that's coming in and out, the piles of dirt that we can see as we drive down our road, it's just disappointing that there wasn't any communication to us butters that this was all happening. Just the noise, we can feel our homes vibrating. And it's just very disappointing that we weren't informed of any of this, and that there wasn't any regard for the families in the neighborhood and that the danger that it's imposing to our children, where it's easy for them to access. And it transpired very quickly without any notification from the town.
So you think heavy equipment's driving on the roadway past your homes?
Just behind the Fife's home, where all the dirt is being, removed from the area.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you. Jennifer, did you want to speak? Did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, 9 Sleigh Ride Lane. We are literally right behind the property where all the work is being done. We're happy to have more houses, and have residential built behind us. However, it just really does not feel like that is what being done on this property right now. It feels as though it's a gravel pit. They've just been digging for months. There are piles and mountains of dirt behind my home, directly behind my home, the Mchugh's home. It is getting to the point where it is starting to fall into our property. The wind blows, it's starting to blow into our, on our land. So it just doesn't feel like the initial plans that were approved by the town are being carried out. It feels like this is being, more of a commercial, commercial property right now. I obtained footage from somebody else who lives in a different neighborhood of a drone footage of what it actually looks like behind my house, because I can't see it. All I can see now is piles of dirt. And I also have a beautiful view now of all of the silos and smokestacks rather than trees that used to be there. So I couldn't really see it, but it truly just looks like a commercial gravel pit right now. So it's hard to believe, because this was a property that had a home on it and a barn on it. So, it was set up for a residential building anyway. She had a lot of land, the previous owner. So my concern, not only for the health of my family, my neighbors, because of what is going on, but what is the final intent of what is going to happen on this property? Is it going to be truly residential homes? They initially wanted to move the barn to Chuck's point. Where were they moving it to? There was no foundation made for it. It does not feel like the initial plans are being carried out. And what is happening behind us is just concerning for our health. And honestly, just what happened to the property is a shame. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful lot of land, and it's just been decimated.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Are there any other abutters on the call that want to make a comment?
We have 3 other people raising their hands. And then I unmuted Kevin Hunt. He's with Littleton Electric and Light and Water Department.
Okay.
Cindy, if maybe Joe, just remind or explain to people how they can raise their hand. I'm not sure that everybody understands how to use the feature.
At least I can send out a message through chat to let people know. So it seems that at least came through. But when you the raise your hand function should be on the lower portion of the toolbar. So we also have Thomas Connors, who I'll unmute.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Layden. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I live at 5A Road. I was neighbors with Prudence Ersch, who owned that property for 16 years. I bought it back in 2003. She was a great neighbor, a great mom, a great grandmother. This has kind of been one of those situations that growing up and watching developers do this type of thing, I have no problem with houses going in there. It's a little disconcerting. I've had people driving up my driveway yelling at me about what's going on and how Littleton's heritage has been destroyed by tearing down the barn and tearing down the house and stripping the farm of, a 100-year-old farm. But I think what's most concerning to me is every day I go out at 7 a.m., I hear commercial vehicles operating. I have a huge screening machine that's separating sand from dirt and gravel and rock. And all of my house and my yard and my trucks and everything else is covered in dust and sand from it. So my question is this has just been a few months. This is without a doubt, it's a commercial mining operation that's going on, and the plan is to have it go for another 2 years. So my concern right now is having a commercial mining operation. What happens in June, July, and August when it's 90 degrees and it's hot out and there's dust and everything all over the place from in a residential neighborhood with, as Jennifer was saying, we have kids out in pools and everything else, and it's it's a nuisance. It's going to end up being a hazard. And I have no problem with the houses. That's part of life. But to run a commercial mining operation, which is without a doubt, it's what it's become.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Joe?
Yes, we have Jay Mchugh.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jay.
Hi, guys. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate you all. I appreciate having this opportunity to speak publicly through this Zoom. Prayers go out to the Knox family. It's very difficult right now for all of us. I echo my previous neighbors who eloquently said things that the heat that's behind what we really want to tell the board, we can't say, as you can understand. But I can tell you my 30 plus years of a real estate agent with no disposition on my record. That's a residential zone property. It's being run as a commercial business. Folks have looked the other way. They put children, pets, TJ, his family in harm's way for the ultimate dollar. We can sit there and talk about the point. Thank you very much, Counselor. The point is not in a residential zone neighborhood. You have gone beyond the scope of practicality. There are other people that are going to speak after me. I'm going to hold up what I really feel about what has gone on under your watch, but under my watch, TJ's watch, Jennifer's watch, Vincent's watch, the rest of the neighborhood. Because if this were in your backyard, if it was in your backyard, I guarantee it would have been stopped. And I appreciate Joe for taking my calls over the last couple of weeks. We had to put a stop order on because of the nuisance and the beyond scope of the intent of the original permit. The fact that a barn was supposed to be relocated in the middle of the night, it was destroyed. All I can say is that if we don't speak up now, we're not going to look back in 6, 7, 8 months and say, Jay, you're right, we should have spoken up. So I applaud my neighbors for being on this call during a difficult time with all of us under pressure with this COVID-19. And I appreciate you taking my call. But we are just totally amazed at what has gone on in our backyard and the scope of it without our officials who work for us as town residents paying taxes. And I appreciate your work, but to look potentially the other way on this massive project, incidental dirt removal.
Mr. Mchugh, if I may, no, I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your position, especially under the circumstances and living with this day to day. But we have been addressing this issue. Our building commissioner put a stop work order on it. And the reason that we are addressing the issue is the reason that we're here today. Are there any other abutters who have comments to make?
We have two other people. We have first Vincent Furlan.
Hey, this is Shobna here. I live in 8 Sleighride Lane, and this is my husband, Vincent. So we are next door neighbors of Jen. Again, I have to echo the same feelings Jen and Kerry and Jay has, and of course TJ too. So we are the immediate neighbors. Our property are in border with this property that they are building. 3 houses. How much digging would it take to build 3 houses and put 3 foundation for 3 months? That is totally never heard of. You dig a foundation for 1 house, maybe for a week, and again another house for another week and another house for another week. Months and months together, and our house is shaking all the time whenever there is something going on, and heavy building sounds all the time when we are at house. So yeah, I totally in agreement with Kerry, Jen, Jay, TJ, all my neighbors that this is definitely not a residential property. This doesn't look like a residential property. And even after 3 months, not even one single foundation has been laid. Not even one single foundation. This is happening from December, January, February, March, and we are into April, halfway in April, and not even one single foundation has been laid. And how do we call this as a residential property?
Okay.
So that's all. With that, I close my comment. But again,
And what is your first name again, please?
my name is Shobana Jayaraman, and this is Vincent Furlan. We live in 9 Sleigh Ride Lane.
Great.
Sorry, 8
Thank you
Sleigh
so
Ride
much.
Lane. I'm sorry. Sorry, Jen. I'm not taking your house.
I was just wondering the level of digging that was going on. Are they really trying to build a house on the ground, or are they actually trying to do something that is subterranean, building some house down below the ground? That is the level of depth they have dug the hole. I don't know how many of you have actually come down to this place to take a look at it, because we are not going down there. It's not that easy to get up the hill and try to look in anyway, and we don't want to do it, right? The second thing I'm wondering is, do we know by now how many more weeks and months the digging is going to be going on? If we don't have a timeline on how long this digging is going to go on, how are we going to guarantee that this is just going to be done to build a house?
Okay.
That is my only question.
Okay.
We don't know how long the digging is going to happen again for another 3 months, 6 months. What is the timeline? If it is truly the timeline that is needed to build 3 houses, who is going to guarantee that this is really, really needed to build a house?
Okay.
Who is checking on
Okay,
Joe,
thank you.
Joe, can you keep their mic open for the Furlans?
Sure.
Cindy, if I may, can I ask a question of the neighbors, the abutters?
Yep.
And since the Furlans mic is still open, I'll just maybe I misheard this, but were any of you notified? Vincent?
No, we did not get any notification.
No notification.
No notification. We did not get any mail or anything. So we were on vacation. We went to India. We went we left US on December 5th and came back on January 5th. And when we came back, all we saw is a big pile of dirt behind our house, and we don't know what is happening. Okay. And after 2 weeks, Jen went and talked to the town office to understand what is going on. And then she was the one who shared with us that there is a plan to build 3 houses. But with all the digging going on, we just can't imagine, because we built this house from ground up. Jen built her house from ground up. We know what all goes when a house is being built. How long would you dig for a foundation? This house foundation was dug in 1 day.
Thank you.
And they poured the cement and the whole basement. It was all done in a day or 2, or probably maybe 3 or 4 days. How long does it take for 3 houses?
No, I think the big question is this, right?
Okay.
Thank you. So if I well, actually, I just lost him. I was able to see Mr. Mchugh on my screen, and maybe Joe, you can see the panel. But is there a way that we can ask other abutters if they were notified, if they?
Yeah, Chuck, I was going to wait to see if there was any other abutters that wanted to speak.
So we did have Jennifer Thomas and Stephen Doyle all raise their hand, and I think Carrie was acknowledging that she wanted to say something as well.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Chuck? With respect to the notification element of it, were you notified when the planning board was reviewing the plans of this? I don't know when that would have been. Perhaps the building inspector would recall, but I'm going to guess it was a significant amount of time prior to initiating construction. Oh, I see Chris has got his hand up.
Chris has his hand up.
I just want to clarify that what the planning board approved for this property is an A&R plan, which stands for approval not required. That is a form of subdivision plan, which is actually not a subdivision. Those plans get approved by right by the planning board as long as all the lots shown on them have enough frontage on a public way to satisfy the zoning bylaw. So that plan approving 3 house lots, not 3 houses, not any earth removal, but just the 4 corners of 3 lots was approved by the planning board, and that wouldn't have required notice to abutters. It's an unusual form of subdivision that they approve administratively. So I believe there was an order of conditions approved by the Conservation Commission that probably required notice. but that would have gone to just the wetlands. So there's been a couple approvals here, one of which probably had notice. The planning board's A&R approval, I assume, did not and wouldn't have needed it, which brings us to what they're applying for now, which is a public hearing where everybody's, I assume, been notified. But the planning board approval technically wouldn't have required notice to the abutters, but nor did it approve any actual earth removal from the property.
So Chris,
yep.
Once this became a commercial operation and they posted signs that this was a mining operation, at that point in time, I would have to assume that there would be some requirement because it's no longer a residential property, it's a commercial mining operation.
At which point, the minute they took any earth off of the property that wasn't incidental to the to the relocation of the barn, they needed a permit from the Board of Selectmen, which is what they've applied for now.
Can we go down that path for a second? And between Chris and Ed, can you help me understand what incidental means in a statutory definition context? You guys are both smiling, which makes me nervous.
It's ambiguous.
You can go first if you want. Well, the bylaw, your soil removal bylaw, does not define incidental. It merely says that any earth removal that is incidental to a building permit is exempt from the bylaw. You don't need a permit for it. Ed can offer a differing opinion, but to me, that authorizes the removal of any earth that is necessarily connected to what you're building. So if you're building a house, you can take off I assume you can take off enough earth to the earth needed to excavate the foundation and maybe to do some grading around the side of the building.
Or septic.
But if you're putting a house, on one corner of the lot, it certainly doesn't allow you, I wouldn't think, to remove earth from, the far corner of the property for no obvious reason relating to the building. But again, the bylaw doesn't define it. So I think you sort of have to resort to some common sense in terms of what is needed to construct the building that you've been issued a building permit for.
So just to add to that, if I may, so drainage, septic, foundation, and driveway, and those are all regulated by different standards. So driveway has to have a certain slope. There's all kinds of methods that they can use to justify some of the soil removal under a building permit. But an earth removal permit is the proper way to go. That's why they're before you now.
So Ed, the A&R that was issued from the planning board, which I think you have some knowledge of, back in September, was for frontage on Air Road.
Mm-hmm.
So the driveways that were proposed with that A&R were coming, 3 separate driveways coming out to Air Road.
They were showing one shared driveway and one individual driveway. So there was 2 driveways proposed on the A&R, I believe. I'm not sure they even showed it on the A&R. They show it on the plan for the barn relocation,
where the driveway goes all the way back to the relocated barn.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm trying to make sense of this, and it's not really making sense. I don't even know what my next question is.
Can I follow up with a question then, Chuck?
Please.
Can anyone tell me, whether it's the applicant or the building inspector, what the pre-construction elevation was, where the houses are going to be located, and what the proposed elevation of the houses is going to be at? In other words, was it 600 feet above sea level and we're now at 580 feet above sea level for the new houses? How does pre-construction and post-construction elevation at floor grade compare?
Sure. Chase, if from memory, I don't have the plan in front of me, but I believe that the top elevation shown, which would be level to the abutter's yard, would be like 270. And I think they're showing grade for the 3 foundations to be 242, I think. Joe might be looking at the plan. So.
Joe, do you want to unmute Jennifer Platt so she can?
I'm trying to.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
There she goes.
Thank you. And thank you, Chase. The elevations are all, the pre and proposed elevations are all shown on the site plan that you have. And that's, again, that's the plan that we worked through with Conservation and DEP to make sure that drainage worked, and with Mass Highway to make sure that access to Air Road, which is a state highway, worked. As the neighbors would say, digging a foundation in and of itself may not take that long, but the fill that's coming, the earth that's coming off the site is mainly to get the grade down so we can have proper access to Air Road. And that's where as you said, there's two driveways. One's a shared driveway and then a separate independent driveway. So to get those so they can have appropriate grade to meet state building code, as well as to have the drainage work on the site, there is, significant earth that's coming off the site. I mean, I would say this is incidental or required for the building plans that we've submitted, but we're here because we want to work with you. We do want to hear from the neighbors. I mean, we don't want this to have significant impact, but this is what's being done to allow 3 houses to be built on that property. And I would just circle back. There have been some comments about relocating the barn, and it was a cool structure. I like it. I liked it. They wouldn't have put a foundation in for it yet, given the amount of work that needs to be done for septic and everything else on site. So that is something that would have happened later in the process. So the absence of that now should not be considered.
And back to the original question, the elevation change from original grade to the grade where you can construct the house. If Ed's recollection is right, that's 28 feet. So we have to bring the lot 28 feet lower to construct these houses.
It's shown, you see it all.
Kevin's letter states the elevations. Chase.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have it in front of me, Chase, and the existing grade, as Ed had noted, was about 270, and the house, the barn location where it was being relocated, that grade is coming down to about 238, and then the 2 houses in front are actually a little bit lower. They're at about 236 for foundation. Well, actually, the actual top of foundation is 241. So I guess, it's about 30 feet.
30 feet plus or minus. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. Are there any other abutters on the call that wanted to make a comment?
We still have Stephen Doyle, who has his hand raised, and then we have Jennifer and Thomas again.
Okay. So Stephen, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Yes, Stephen Doyle, 2 Sleigh Ride Lane. As some of my neighbors have mentioned, we're not against development, but I think the developers have been disingenuous here with what they've been trying to do. I think this moving of the barn was a scam, not a scam, I shouldn't say a scam, but was a front to do what they really wanted to do with the property. It just miraculously didn't work. I would think that somebody that was trying to move a historical barn or some structure of this case before they had proposed moving the barn would have taken assurances that they were able to do that in a way that wouldn't have it be destroyed. This permit, obviously I'm not familiar with the process, but the fact that they didn't have to notify any abutters of their plans. The attorney for the developers referenced the point. I'm fairly certain when the point came up, there was a lot of notification of the amount of earth removal that was going to be taking place.
Yeah.
If they've been looking to move some of this earth, they're putting in a subdivision. There's a big, whether you're calling that a driveway or a road, if it's that steep, they put in a commercial scale. I think it's the attorney mentioned that, they're worried about making sure that they're complying with the load limits on the streets. That's, That's a nice little argument for why they put a scale in, but you put a scale in when you're doing commercial mining and when you're selling off the dirt and you're making sure that you have the right amounts. If they're just moving incidental dirt, they're not worried about what they're putting on the roads. It's a commercial scale that's there that they put in there. So I think it's just, I'm all about, like I said, development, following the rules. There's a process. These developers have gone around that process and made a lot of people look the other way, or trying to get people to look the other way with this. Again, they were trying to move a barn. They wanted to develop 3 houses. Great, develop 3 houses. Maybe there was a better way than having to have all 3 of the driveways go down a steep embankment or remove as much dirt or earth as they've had. I think they wanted to do that all along so that they could use it as a commercial mining facility as a way to, recoup some of those costs as well. So I'm just disappointed in the way they've gone about this whole process. And, thinking on just at that point, like I said, our neighbors, they're very reasonable people. And we want more neighbors back there, but we want it done correctly. And when you go around doing things correctly, I think you lose your opportunity to do that. And I'm very disappointed in what they've done. Disappointed for our neighbors who, like I said, it's a fantastic neighborhood. We want more great people in Littleton. We want more great people living near us. But we just respect, we respect the town and the process that people need to go through. And I'll just reiterate one more time that I'm very disappointed in the way the developer's gone about this. And I think they're being very disingenuous with the fact that they said they were going to move a barn and how they've gone about trying to build these 3 lots per se with this mining operation that they're running. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Was there one more abutter, Joe?
I believe we still had Jennifer that wanted to make another comment, as well as Thomas that wanted to make another comment.
Sure, Jennifer?
Hi, sorry, just I want to kind of reiterate what Shobana and Vincent were talking about regarding kind of the disruption of what has been happening, and really what is the timeline looking like if this is going to be residential. In fact, it's getting very disturbed. My house is, when the work was going on, and of course now I was home all day long to really feel it once the stay at home was put in place. The shaking of my home, I mean, I'm in bed and my bed is shaking, disruptive, but I'm also concerned, what does the timeline look like? My kids are outside literally playing next to this pile of dirt. So are Shobana's and Vincent's kids. So is Jay's child. So are everybody else in our neighborhood. It's concerning. I'm also concerned about radon. Every house in our neighborhood had to have an active radon system put in due to all of the, everything that all the radon gas that was pulling up. So with this constant digging and all this, what is this doing to as my kids are playing outside too? So just kind of reiterating again, if this is going to be residential, which we really do hope it is, it just doesn't look like it is, but really, what is the timeline looking like? What can my kids play out in our yard? Is it safe? This is concerning.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
Appreciate it.
Sure. So I just was taking some notes here based on comments made by the abutters regarding concerns over this project, and just summarizing them here. We have site control, public safety, the timeline, the level of noise, restoration to the property after the condition of the property after the project's complete, the screening operation that's taking place on the property, is that customary to a normal earth removal project, shaking of homes, and the radon levels and the pile of dirt and the kids that are playing in it. And another comment was made of soil actually spilling into a butter's property, onto their property lines. So those are the concerns that have been expressed, and they're also concerns to me, especially children playing in the piles of dirt. I'd like to hear from the applicant, unless the board has any other comments or questions. If they could respond to those concerns that were raised by the abutters, I'd appreciate it.
Cindy, let me just jump in here. Somebody mentioned a 2-year time frame. Is that?
It's on the application.
Okay.
It says the project will be completed in 2022.
But that's talking about the whole project. Maybe either Attorney Platt or one of the developers can answer when the mining operation would be, when they anticipate that would be done.
That was on the removal permit. Yeah.
But they're saying the project would be done by 2022, correct? Is that how it's? So I'd like some clarification on that. Since we're going to be since you're bringing in the developers now, if they could maybe answer that for us.
Yeah, it says operations will be complete, so we'll get that clarification.
Of course, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chuck.
Yep.
Just there are a number of concerns, and we'll try to go through those. And if to the extent we miss any, please just remind me, and I'm happy to go through those. And we do have John Durkin, who is the head of Onyx, available as well to talk to us about some of more of the details about how you can comply with the safety regulations and to make sure that there is no offsite impact. One of the things you will see is topsoil. You'll see topsoil that's being gathered and kept on site because that's not being removed, and that is being kept. So at the end of the project, it can be used to stabilize the project, to regrade it. As you can see from the notes on the plans, there's a obligation to stabilize and put I believe it was 4 inches of topsoil across the whole project once it is done. There are many residential projects, and I should refer to them as well, where this is a very common part of the development, where earths are either removed from the site, relocated on site, brought on site to add or take away from the elevation to allow the project to proceed according to the plans. This particular project, granted, has a lot of earth that is being taken off site to allow the grading to happen, which will allow you to have access onto Air Road. And that's our access off this property. That's our frontage. And there is a significant elevation change that needs to happen to be able to have appropriate grading to get onto Air Road. And that's one of the reasons that this will take some time. There are residential projects in town where fill has been coming or earth has been coming on and off site, not just for a year or two, but over the course of a decade or more. So it is not unusual for this to happen as part of a project. We do have someone on site who has set up the safety station to make sure that this is compliant with state and federal regs. And as much as you want to say this is a mining operation, technically by federal statute, anything where you're not moving purely organic materials, purely soil, topsoil and mulch, qualifies as a mining operation. So every other building project in town should be complying with the same regs that we're trying to comply with, and should be here in front of you as well if work required to be. I think if you don't mind, I'd like to get John Durkin, if we can add him. He's the head of Onyx, who is helping manage the soil or the earth removal from site, and could give you a little information about how work is being conducted to comply with state and federal regs, what they do to try to keep dust down and to minimize impact. And again, I mean, we understand that we do have residential neighbors, we do have industrial neighbors. We want to be a good neighbor. No notices were given because none were required until this meeting. Notice was given out, and then of course for anything for conservation, notices to the extent that are required, they're always given. So there wasn't a attempt to hide anything. It's to the extent that notices are required, they've been given. That being said, John, are you available to jump in?
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I guess I just want to inform everybody, the board, they probably don't have a lot of information on how MSHA versus OSHA regulations govern how you move soil on a construction site and or a mine. There was a lot of questions about that for the last probably 100 years on what is regulated by OSHA and what's regulated by MSHA. There was determination about 15 years ago that basically said if you're removing very specifically sand, gravel, bedrock, rock material, that you have to comply with MSHA regulation. And that was for the reason of needing MSHA's oversight for the protection of the neighbors. Really what happens is OSHA is involved in many different building aspects as far as electrical oversight, electrocution hazards, fall hazards, all those kind of regulations. And that's to keep the worker safe. MSHA was engaged to protect the worker as well as give oversight on the regulations that they imposed to protect the worker, which also applied to the neighbors. So what happened was proper procedures. If any sand or gravel or stone is leaving a commercial development, either to be sold or utilized off-site, then MSHA has to regulate the site. So back in December, we applied for an MSHA permit. We had a preliminary permit sent to us in January. Basically what that does is it means that you are registering your property to be used as a commercial removal operation of sand, gravel, stone, etc. And what that essentially does is engages MSHA to come out for a pre-site inspection. So once you've stripped your topsoil, stripped your loam, and are now excavating sand and gravel, you're supposed to, within 30 days, have a preliminary visit from MSHA, which we had. I don't have the exact date, but I can provide that if anybody would like it. And what that does is that establishes, okay, for MSHA, here's your surrounding neighbors that are potentially exposed, as well as, or they're potentially exposed to noise, vibration, dust emissions, all those pertinent things that I'm sure all the neighbors are extremely concerned about. I haven't met one yet that wasn't concerned about that. So all we can do as good operators is try to comply and try to appease and do the best practices we can. They call them BMPs, best management practices. And what MSHA is doing is they work with us, the contractor, to establish BMPs to make sure that you're not overexposing neighbors unnecessarily to the operation. In conclusion, I mean, the plan that was presented by Ducharme and Dillis, once the site has been excavated down, you know, a good 20, 30 feet, there'll be absolutely no noise for the neighbors because it's going to reflect upward. The proposal that we put together for MSHA was we took all the topsoil, we stockpiled it on the perimeter of the site, and we graded it with a bulldozer at a 45-degree angle, which is on purpose to reflect the noise vertically away from the neighbors. Obviously, that took some noise and vibration and, you know, compaction of that slope to establish it with bulldozers and excavators and haul trucks and everything else that's involved up there. But the purpose of that is to, one, give you somewhat of a visual barrier as well as a sound barrier, and also as a catch-all for any kind of runoff that potentially could come off of stockpiles. The next thing is setting up berms on the site to keep vehicular vehicles that are removing the soil from going over an embankment into a neighboring property, onto a state road, etc., for safety purposes, which we had an inspection and passed. So I guess there's a dust emissions requirement, which actually allows 2 tons of respiratory dust emissions per day from a site like this. We had respirators put on our operators, which monitors them who are directly in the dust to monitor that they're not being overexposed to emissions like silica and things like that from the soils being removed. And the results were negative on the test. So we got the blessing from Mchugh to go ahead and open the site. And about 3 or 4 days later, we got a cease and desist order on the property. We spent the rest of that day closing up open soils and whatever we could to get ready for being suspended of work. And we really have not performed much work there in the last few weeks while all this is shaken out. So that's kind of all I can say about Mchugh oversight. That's federal regulation. Those signs that say mining is because the Mining Safety and Health Administration is what Mchugh stands for. Those are standard signs that are required to be printed with that information for worker and neighboring safety. So that's what you see up there on the ground.
John, so what was the date of that Mchugh inspection?
I don't have it on me. I can provide it tomorrow. I don't know exactly when the inspection was, but also anybody
But
that
it was
wants
approximately January. Is that right, John?
well, the pre-construction inspection, we began the process in January, and we had our on-site inspection. I can't place it exactly, but it was about a week or so before us getting the cease and desist order. I don't have that date on me, but I can provide it.
So that would be most likely mid-March.
Okay.
Cindy, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Thank you. John, this is Chris Eve, Town Council. I just want to follow up on a statement I think I just heard you made. Did you say you believe you're allowed 2 tons of dust emissions per day from this site?
Yes, there's a particulate weight measure per acre of what's allowed, and I believe 2 tons is what we were told by Mchugh. So what they do is they put a monitor on the operators in the equipment that are exposed to the dust to tell them what their particulate exposure is. And we passed it. I can't remember the results. I think it was 25% of the legal limit.
And where are you measuring that?
On the person's body. They hang it off of the operator's body, and they monitor it for an 8-hour period while they're operating.
And at the property line? What about at the property line?
No, it's on the actual equipment operators that are running the equipment because they're most exposed. They stay at the property line. Your emissions level is going to drop the further you get from the actual equipment. So they monitor right at the equipment.
What are you allowed at the property line?
That I don't know offhand. It's you can find it on EPA's website as well as Mchugh's website.
What are your actual emissions at this property line?
We have not measured it.
Thank you.
Cindy, can I do a follow-up question as well?
Sure.
John, Chuck DeCoste, Board of Selectmen. Could you tell us how much material has been removed from the site? I'd have to estimate. I don't have exact figures. We ran some quick numbers. We weren't tracking every single load, but an approximate of 30,000 yards. And how much are you planning to remove? There's 160,000 total. So you can take that down by 30. So there's about 130,000 left. What is the estimated time to do that removal? Contractually, we have 2 years. My estimate as a resident of Littleton and at the pace that we hauled it out of there, for 6 months out of the year, it's extremely busy. I predict it's going to go on for about 1.5 years. Possibly could be as short as a year. But. And that's for incidental. That's not for incidental. That's for actual soil removal. That's, I guess, an Ed Mullen question. Well, it is a question for you, John. Yeah. That's for us to safely mine it out of there and get it out, to remove it from the land, to sever it and truck it. Yes, that's correct. I think it's going to take 1 year at a minimum.
Can I ask a couple questions as well, Cindy?
Sure.
John, you said you've got slopes at a 45-degree angle, right?
Yes.
So I'm really struggling with that, particularly the safety of it immediately adjacent to a residential area. Soils of that slope at least per OSHA, and I'm not super familiar with MSHA, but per OSHA, that's only permissible for extremely cohesive soils. If you're taking sand and gravel out of there, I have a really hard time believing that you've got very cohesive soils. Can you help me understand the basis for why that slope is acceptable and safe, especially immediately adjacent to a residential area where there's kids and you have, the potential for exposure to residentials?
Yeah, it's not designed for safety. It's designed for noise reflection. So, it is not actually designed for safety of safety of residential people around it. No. So is that a commercial regulation or is it a residential regulation? It's a sound attenuating regulation that MSHA has put into place. So it's on an existing mine. Anybody that's removing soil. But they don't have any stipulations for residential versus commercial. I don't believe I've ever seen that, Chuck. No. Okay. I've never seen the delineation. No. Okay.
And Cindy, I have a question for council. Chris, can you help me understand? We now have a permit in front of us.
Yep.
I think it's a fundamental failing somewhere along the way that a 30-foot cut across, let's call it 200,000 cubic yards of material is considered an incidental cut, even if 40 of that may be subject to this removal permit. So let's set that aside for a second, though. What we saw in the last soil removal permit that we had was the ability to impose conditions on the permit.
Mm-hmm.
How do those conditions mesh with the federal regulations that may govern the mining? That is, can we impose conditions that are more restrictive than a federal agency?
Well, I'm hearing something. I don't want to avoid your question, but I think I'm going to raise I think it leads maybe to another one, which is that I'm hearing something for the first time tonight, which is that this is a mine. If this is a mine, it's not allowed under zoning in a residential neighborhood, period. Now I'm raising a zoning issue, which is separate from the earth removal issue. If they want to remove just as much earth as they need to build a house, that's a use that could be described as sort of incidental to building of the house. And therefore, as a matter of zoning, would be allowed by right. You'd still need the earth removal permit from the Board of Selectmen to remove the earth, but as a use, it's part, we roll it up as part of the residential use. But if they're saying that they're a mine subject to federal mining regulations, I'm sort of just starting to think about other issues other than use issues that are separate and apart.
Chris, or John, if you want to jump in, it's not a mine. It's under the Fed regs. Any residential development where you take earth out of it would then qualify as a mine. So I think you'd have to be very careful with the use of that word here. What is being done is to remove enough earth so that you can grade the property to get access to the road in front.
Ms. Ply, with all due respect, that you've backed into the requirement to remove this amount of earth by designing the driveways in the manner that you did. It is perfectly reasonable to have constructed houses on top of this with a different driveway design. So the result, the argument that this is simply incidental to residential construction is disingenuous. If the driveways were modified accordingly, then none of this 30-foot cut, this 200,000 cubic yards would be necessary in any realistic scenario. And we would be back to a scenario in which a certain amount of material removal is in fact incidental.
So
but we backed into this based on the design.
Well, the existing house did not have a driveway onto Air Road. They had a shared driveway that went across the neighbor's yard, neighbor's property. So for these lots to have access directly onto Air Road, they're going, perpendicular with the road as opposed to going sideways at a lower grade across the abutting property.
Or you could implement a switched back driveway or something. I'm not aware of anything, perhaps the building inspector can correct me, but I'm not aware of any requirement that the driveway has to be immediately perpendicular to the slope down to the road. And that is fundamentally how we've backed into why a 30-foot cut is quote unquote incidental. Removing a mountain is not incidental to constructing 3 houses.
I agree.
The lot layout that we have was part of our A&R plan to get those 3 lots approved. There could have been 4. The design, perhaps you can argue that there'd be a different design for this. This is what we thought was the best layout for the property to be able to utilize it and to have appropriate drainage. And there's nothing in the bylaws which say, this is not an appropriate use of this property. As you know, it was a single house lot originally. All of the properties back on Slay Road were part of this property and have been built on into the back of it. So yes, there could be another way to access this. There's always another, there might be another option, but this was the design that we had approved and permitted and has had a lot of input from various boards. Again, earth removal as part of construction of a residential property or where we have 3 lots here is very common, and it's not unusual for a significant amount of fill to come in or out. This is the first time, though, that someone has come in front of this board, and we're happy to be here. We want to try to work with you to set up, if you think, some reasonable uses or timing on the use to make it work and to try to minimize impact. As far as we know, there hasn't been any impact, soil going or piles of soil on anyone else's property. Those are all contained within the property. But again, so we're happy to have your input here. But this is this development is in this layout. Looking at the plan now, it's fairly traditional, 3 houses.
Ms. Platt, there's nothing traditional about 60,000 cubic yards of material taken out to construct each of these houses. That's not common, that's not traditional, and it's not incidental.
And until we can actually take a look at the A&Rs of the planning board, I'm not sure I'm interested in moving forward with this hearing.
Right.
I would like council to look into how this fits together with the federal mining regulations, to understand how the mining regulations might be applied in other residential scenarios, so on and so forth.
And I can, if this is continued to a subsequent meeting, I can certainly do that. But I was going to answer the question anyway, not having done that yet and not being perfectly familiar with federal mining regulations right now or previously. But the answer is going to be that the board is not going to be constrained by federal mining regulations in the conditions that it can impose in this earth removal permit. I was, to the extent that federal mining regulations allow the emission of 2 tons per day from the site of dust, you can certainly impose conditions that say, at the property line, there's going to be none, or they're going to mitigate it in some way. Like what I heard earlier is not consistent with what I think of as normal construction management practices that is commonly imposed in all sorts of permits in Massachusetts by local boards. So the answer is I will certainly look and report back, but the answer is going to be nothing I've heard tonight suggests to me that your power to impose conditions in this permit is limited in any way.
So hypothetically, if we wanted to impose a condition that limited the dust suppression or impose dust suppression requirements to bring that down from whatever the federal regulations require to something lower, would be within our power and purview.
I would expect to see that in all sorts of land use permits in Massachusetts. That would be completely normal and unremarkable.
We
Chris
would
and
not be
Chase,
adverse to that.
can I just give you guys a little background? Because I'm just dealing with this right now. We're in the middle of a lengthy 12-year process down in Woburn, 1042 Main Street, where we're moving 450,000 yards of rock in 18 months. We have 525 residences within 500 yards. No one, including any board across the entire state of Massachusetts, has ever been able to impose a regulation changing the federal mining regulation for emissions to a neighborhood. I just want to bring you up to speed on that so that I know what you're saying. So what it is there's an implementation of best management practices, and what we have to do as operators is give the best result we possibly can. We Kevin, you were still on the line. We applied for a permit to get a meter, a hydrant meter from you guys back in, was it late February or March? And the purpose of that was, and the purpose of that was so that we could get water on site to help control the dust from the operation. While the winter time was here, we had a really wet winter. We had very little dust emission from the site. So, as we set up and got the site established, we have been thinking about how we're going to control that dust. And all the plants that are up there have dust emission systems on them, which are spray bars. I also took it a further step, and I don't know if Rob spoke to you, Kevin, but the intent was to take the existing water service on site, hook a 1-inch hose to it, and that way we could have a constant feed of pressurized water to all the plants to help hold the dust down. As well as our plans were to put in a sprinkler system down the roadway to help keep dust from truck traffic down, because the biggest emission of dust is from the trucks driving across the site. The earth, as it's excavated from the ground, actually has quite a bit of moisture in it. Typically, it's when it's flipped and stockpiled for a long period of time that it dries out, and then when a vehicle drives across it, that's when it becomes airborne. So I just wanted to give the board that background that we are thinking about that, and I understand what you're trying to do for putting a regulation on the amount of dust emission, but I have not seen a municipality so far or a state agency be able to impose higher than the federal limit, because it opens them up for a whole bunch of possibilities to shutting down a number of jobs across the state. I just wanted to give you that background. That's all.
Appreciate that, John. And I'd still like Chris to look into it. And to be clear, dust was used as a representative example and was not intended to be an exhaustive list of the things that I'm concerned about here.
Right.
Sure. Yep.
Madam Chair, this is Joe. Just a quick statement. Because we were dealing with some questions to the applicant, their attorney, and their contractor, their engineer was also muted. So I unmuted him in case there was any additional detail he was going to contribute to answering the board's questions.
This is Greg Roy with Ducharme and Dillis. Can you all hear me?
Sure.
Yep. Thanks very much. Appreciate the time to speak this evening. I just wanted to raise one point. We've thrown around the elevations on the site. The existing elevation of 270 feet. That's the highest elevation on the site. The average elevation where the back lawn was is probably more like 266, 268, just for the kind of not much of a difference, but just for reference, the road grade is elevation 222. So the proposed houses the proposed top of foundation elevations are about 20 feet, almost 20 feet above the road elevation. So we are definitely not, we haven't proposed a overly flat grade from the road. One of the grades is almost 12%. And the other one, the one that's being utilized for the removal of the soil is proposed at 8%. So we're certainly not trying to over excavate that. We're trying to keep those as steep as possible to get up into the site. That was one of our, was an instruction given to me as part of my design input. So I just wanted to give you give you a little bit more background there.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Madam Chair?
Certainly, Paul.
Yep, just wanted to follow up a couple of lines of questions with a few of our town officials. I had questions for the applicants as well, but they seem to be mostly addressed in the questions that Chuck and Chase had asked. But I'm thinking, and this is with a mind to some of the abutters who are raising concerns about the process and how we ended up here in some respects after the fact. And I know that was discussed at previous meeting, not in this hearing though, and I wonder if the building commissioner might speak to that a little bit. The way it was presented to us, or at least as I understood it, was that the applicants had been under one advice from your predecessor, and when you came on board, your view is different, and hence the stop work order and the requirement for this hearing. So I wondered if you might recap some of that, and secondarily, Ed, whether you could speak in your capacity as a zoning enforcement officer, whether or not this issue of mine, not mine, commercial, residential, how that impacts this application before us tonight in your mind.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Glavy. So I issued a stop work order on May 23rd after reviewing, I'm sorry, March 23rd after reviewing the original plans when we got a few complaints came in regarding the work going on. I think you all have a copy of the letter in your packets. I don't know if any of the abutters have it, but it's public record if they'd like to receive a copy. But just to quick summarize, I'll read just the first paragraph, which says, after reviewing the building permit issued to 9 Air Road, foundation for existing barn relocation to rear property, it has been determined that when the barn collapsed during the attempted relocation process, the permit should have been amended to a demolition permit. Completion of the demolition would have resulted in a final inspection and closing the permit. So effective immediately, building permit B19-332 is invalid and revoked. All work must cease on site. My understanding was before I was the commissioner in town that they were in conversation with the interim commissioner, and I'm not sure, there were several wearing that hat, so I don't know which one, but they had discussed this with the interim commissioner and were told that incidental removal with a building permit that they would be able to do, and they did show the cut limits that are shown on the site. So the 30-foot cut was shown to the previous interim commissioner, and they were informed that this was a process that would be acceptable. Okay. So in my review, determining that it isn't the right process, I've brought them back before you to try to get them on the right path in the right process for a soil removal permit.
How about the zoning mining piece?
So it's my understanding that with a building permit in soil removal, just like Gray Farm, just like Cooper, Weber, or any other subdivision going on in town, that removal or even installation of soils to make the roadways and the grading proper, it's not considered a mining operation. It's considered site construction, and it's allowed in any zone.
Okay, thank you. If Madam Chair, if I might, can I ask a question of Attorney Heap too?
Certainly.
All right. We have the application obviously before us. Chris, what boundaries should we be observing and determining how to act here? What is our guidance legally as to what how we should find something acceptable and not acceptable as a general rule? Is it spoken to in law, or do you have an opinion on that?
He's muted.
Do we have to pay him when his mic's off?
All right, I'm back. In terms of evaluating the application for an earth removal permit, I think the standards are really impacts to the neighborhood and to the streets and the surrounding properties. So you need to be satisfied that whatever amount of earth they are requesting permission to take off of their property, that they're going to leave the property in a condition that is going to be no worse off than it was when they started. That's how that isn't precisely spelled out in your bylaw or your regulations, but I think that's the appropriate standard for evaluating whether or not they can remove the earth. I would also say there's probably a question of whether or not they're removing the minimum amount necessary to build what they can otherwise build by right. They are not allowed under zoning to have a mine in property. They're not allowed to have an earth removal operation as a principal use. They're only allowed to, as a matter of use under zoning, they're only allowed to remove earth or soil or gravel or loam to the extent it's necessary to build something by right. So they have to draw a line between what they can do by right, which is have a single family house, and the amount of earth that they're removing. I haven't heard, respectfully, I haven't heard anybody from the applicant side tonight speak to the need to remove the amount of earth that they are removing in order to build, and no more. So, in order to build 3 single family houses. And I think that may be a question that the board may want to ask. Why are they removing this amount of earth, and could they get away with less in terms of having an impact on the neighborhood? They need to, I think, rationalize to the board why they're taking off the amount of earth that they are taking off of the property. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but if not, I can.
I guess I was just trying to get a feel for whether it's more or less a buy right if you satisfy minimal conditions, or whether the standard is higher, and whether we take into consideration some of the items you just listed. Sounds like that's fair game in your estimate.
Oh, absolutely.
So my understanding, Attorney Heap, is under the town bylaws, if you are removing earth materials in connection with a building permit, it is allowed. For example, Gray Farm has been removing earth from the property for the past 20 plus years as part of their ongoing construction. If you are, and I believe what the town is considering to do now in the going forward is if you are removing more than what might be considered necessary for the project, for the actual house, or under the building permit, then you would need to come in front of the Board of Selectmen. I believe that's the direction that our Inspector Mullen is asking applicants to proceed now. It has not been, as you know, a requirement or has not been required in the past. So that's why we're here with you, trying to work this out. Again, and I can defer to John Durkin or to Greg Roy on the elevations that are proposed in the plan, but and they could give you some more insight on why the driveways are located where they are. But the cut that we're talking about is to get access down to Air Road from these properties. And there was if my client can correct me, but my recollection was these were done as 2 driveways rather than 3 at I believe that was the request of the board. I know there's some, a number of questions here, and we're happy to go to look into these in more detail for you, and to try to help get a good, kind of the best way of approaching this project to have minimal impact and allow it to go forward. So again, we appreciate you working with us, and we want to work with you to try to make this feasible.
So if I may, Jennifer, the last time this matter was brought before us, at the time that we scheduled this public hearing, there were questions about site control that had been brought to the board, concerns from the abutters, specifically rocks and debris actually hitting the windows of their homes, depending on the weather. So that was, that was at the time of our last board meeting, I'm very concerned at this time that we're here for this public hearing, and now having heard from more abutters about the list of concerns with respect to site control, public safety, noise, just the impact it's having on the quality of their right to enjoy their homes. And as I stated before, we can't have children playing in piles of dirt that have spilled over into a butter's residential property from this project. And to me, that's just not acceptable. And what I'm hearing is that the soil's being removed so that to bring the grade down to access Air Road. The soil's not being removed to build 3 homes on the property.
That's for the driveway to access the road. That would be
right. So it's not incidental to the actual building of the homes. It's more incidental to building the driveway and accessing Air Road.
It's part of the overall project, which would require the driveway, the foundation, the septic. And just to step back for a second, your concerns, Madam Chair, on site control, I think are critical. Those are very important. And we will definitely be on site tomorrow, going around the perimeters. There should not be any soil or rocks going off the site onto abutting properties. That should be contained on site. And I'm happy to talk to the applicant about, do we need to put any additional barriers? Again, dirt should not be going off site onto anyone else's property. Right. And if we need to be doing something to protect the site, so neighbors' children shouldn't be coming on site either, but if we need to do something to help to control that, again, I think those are reasonable requests and ones that we would want to work with you on to make sure that the site is, just like any site that we're working on, is safe for both our own workers and the neighborhood. I think those are really important concerns.
Right. Thank you. So I think, and I'm going to defer back to Chris on this. At this time, we've heard from the abutters, we've heard from applicants council, we've heard from Mr. Durkin. And both Chase and Chuck and Paul all brought up good points. At this time, and correct me if my fellow board members if I'm mistaken, I don't think that we have all the information we need at this time to act on this application.
That's how
I agree,
feel.
Cindy. I'm looking at a minimum for Chris to help us out with some guidance.
Yeah, I'd feel a lot more comfortable if we had a better sense of both legal parameters and also a better sense of what's actually going to occur on the property and what it's going to look like during and after the process as proposed.
Chris?
Can I make a quick comment? I don't want to overstep, but I'm leaving tonight with some homework that I'm going to go do. I think there's a couple of things that the board may want to ask the applicant to provide before we're back together again. One thing that I think might be helpful is something from the engineer attempting to specifically tie the amount of earth that they are requesting to remove from the site to the houses and the driveways and the septics and anything else that is necessarily needs to get built in order to have a house on these properties, with some discussion about the earth that they're requesting to remove being the minimum amount necessary in order to build those things.
Okay.
And, I think it's important for the board to know that they're not going above and beyond what is the minimum necessary in order to support the by right residential use of these 3 lots.
Okay.
I'd also suggest that it may be appropriate to ask for a construction management plan in order to, I assume Jennifer said that they're going to go off and attempt to make sure that there's no dust flying off the site impacting the butters. But they ought to have, for a construction site of this size, they ought to have a written construction management plan that ensures that this stuff isn't happening. And it may be, I think, useful for the board to ask for that in writing so that the board can review and comment on it at its next meeting.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all I can think of for now. And I think it's also important to have the engineer certify to the board in some fashion, I think with maybe a narrative letter to go with it, that post-construction conditions are, in the engineer's estimation, not going to have any impact that is different or worse from conditions that were present at the beginning of construction.
Okay. Okay, so,
I mean, with supporting, whatever supporting information they need to provide in order to make that case.
okay. So back to the board. So we will follow up with town council and maybe submit a written request setting forth the points and questions that Chris just narrated to get more information. And then I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that follow-up request.
Well, if we come up with questions between now and whenever the letter goes out, I assume we could just forward them along through Nina or Chris or whoever we're continuing the hearing anyway, so
right.
Whatever happens between now and then, it's an opportunity for new questions to arise and for the applicants to come up with answers for them.
Okay.
Cindy, I like your idea of putting our questions to council in writing, but I think Chris also understands generally what he needs to attack. So don't wait for us to send something to you, Chris. We'll get it to you in a couple days. But
yeah, I agree. Okay.
You need a motion to continue to a date certain.
We did have some additional hands raised. I'm not sure if those additional hands, if there's any members in the audience abutters in the audience who still wish to speak.
I would say I think that would be helpful if there was something new to add that wasn't already covered in the conversation. But if it's just reiterations of what we already heard, I think at this time it might not be beneficial.
Good point.
So it looks like
Mr. Ferlin
had something additional to add. If we can unmute him.
Yeah, so I was looking through the hearing notice and it says approximately 40,000 cubic yards of earth material from the property will be removed. But based on what I heard in the call, it sounds like the total is around 120,000 cubic yards and they took out 30,000 already. So it's not 40,000 we are talking about here. We are talking close to 80 or 90,000 cubic yards. So it goes back to what Chris was talking about. If we are going to have another hearing on the same matter, I would love to see the actual cubic yard that will be taken out of this lot, not some approximate number, because it's not even half. That is in the hearing notice. So it has to be at least close to what the real number is going to be. And the second question is about blowing off all the sand coming from the hill. I understand there are sensors that people wear when they do the work, but they are actually on the ground. They're not standing on top of the hill. So if there is a downwind, it is the soil at the top of the hill that is getting blown to the houses. So any mitigation that is going to be put in place, will that cover that too? I just want to make sure that whatever the mitigation plan that's going to come out of this engineer also takes into account any downwind that is going to hit the hill and any soil that's going to be thrown from the hilltop.
Thank you.
If I may, for the abutter, the amount of soil that's planned to come off the site is what is going to be necessary to construct in accordance with the plans that were submitted to the board, and you can be able to find those on the website. There was an error, I would say, or confusion in the application. The letter from our project engineer did properly cite the total that they're estimating to come out. Again, that will be, it's really a matter of being able to build in accordance with the design and with the plans, but it is that number. I think you heard Mr. Durkin and Mr. Royce say earlier that today closer to 160. It was 1,000.
So
was what was,
Based on what Mr. Durkin said, he said 160,000 yards or whatever it is, and the project period is 2 years. Are we expected to have this, whatever federal mining allows, the 2 tons of dust that can emit from that place? Do we have to go through that for 2 years? Is that good for a residential area with 10 families and each and every family has at least 2 kids? How is that acceptable?
So what we're going to do at this time is we're going to follow back up. Our town council is going to draft a letter of specific questions to the developer. We'll address all of these issues within that correspondence and get the answers that to the issues that have been raised during this meeting tonight. So that's the plan going forward, and we're going to continue this public hearing to a date going forward. We just need to decide on that date, and we'll go from there.
And there would be, to add to that, Madam Chairwoman, there would be opportunity, the hearing, because it would be continued, there would be opportunities for public comment at future dates as well.
Exactly.
Madam Chair, if you could give me a second, because I just got an email from Michael Field. While I had seen him unmuted a few minutes ago, and while we had requested people that want to speak to raise their hand, he did say that he hadn't been able to talk. So it might be good for me to unmute him now in case there is something that he wanted to add.
Sure.
Hi, this is Janet Field, actually. I'm sorry. I was trying to, but I was getting your chats disabled and your microphones muted. I don't know if it was my problem but anyway, I just wanted to share a couple things. I personally walked the site a couple of times in the last 5 days and, up around the perimeter to make sure that there weren't any soil or dirt or anything that I could see, because I wanted to make sure that it was taken care of if that was the case. And I couldn't see any evidence of that. And we did install cameras so that we would be able to kind of monitor the perimeter of the site and make sure that there was no dirt flying or, rocks or debris, like I've heard some feedback. So, we want to make sure everybody's protected. And we definitely have, I'm sorry that we couldn't do it more in line with the meeting, but we do have answers to a lot of your questions in regards to the need for the amount of dirt. And it all revolves around being able to access the lots. I mean, there are building lots and you need to be able to get to them. And if you can't drive up a slope higher than what's allowed by the code, so it's meeting the code basically in order to access the site. But I understand that the meeting is going to continue. And so what we'll do is just get those answers in writing to you. And that way you can have some time to digest them.
That would be helpful, Janet. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we're going to move forward. We're going to continue the public hearing. Do we have a motion for that, Nina, or what's the process for that?
Sure, LCT, there we go. There.
All right, great.
I'll move that the Board of Selectmen continue the earth removal public hearing relating to 9 Air Road to Tuesday, April 21st, 2020 at 8 p.m. to be held online through the Zoom platform being used by the town for Board of Selectmen meetings. I realized I read that motion before we'd actually discussed the date, so maybe we want to talk about that for a second.
That's the FinCom meeting. That's a Tuesday meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Just for formality purposes, if there's a second, then you can have that discussion.
Well, I seconded it.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, so the motion's been made and seconded. Are we in agreement on?
Just discussion now.
Yeah, are we in agreement on the April 21st date?
That's a FinCom joint meeting, right? That's the intent.
At this point, I think we are likely, well, we don't have any expectation to have a FinCom joint meeting unless we are to discuss the PRCE budget again.
we were planning
At
to
least
do.
that was my understanding.
Right.
Perhaps I misunderstood.
So the point I raised earlier today in an email is that with the joint meeting with the FinCom tonight is we really don't have anything on the 21st, or do we?
So I do expect that we will have town meeting warrant discussions. I think perhaps the larger question in all of this is a week enough for the engineer to provide the information that they need to provide, and for our town council to be able to provide the information that they need to provide. Just kind of perhaps we go about this in a different way to determine if the 21st is a practical date.
I think that personally, I think that's a good question to ask, but scheduling wise, we have 2 floating meetings here back, which were set back when we anticipated town meeting and town election the first week in May, which now they're in the middle of June.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever date we pick is fine with me, the 21st or the 27th, but I would ask that we try to schedule our whatever number of items we have on whatever date that is and free the other one up.
So I'm going to propose to the board that we have the hearing on the 27th as opposed to the 21st, just to allow extra time.
Just the previously scheduled meeting, the 21st was an off-cycle meeting, so I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
And I'll amend my motion to April 27th at 8 p.m.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay, great. So the motion.
Chance, you want to move it to 7 p.m.?
No, please. No, I wouldn't recommend that. Unless you, I mean, that's up to the pleasure of the board, but the reason we had it on at 7 p.m. for this evening is because we didn't expect a very large agenda, and I didn't want to put everyone in a situation where we were waiting around. But I don't expect that to be the case with our next meeting, whether that's on the 21st or the 27th, and it sounds like it's going to be on the 27th.
Okay, so it's going to be on the 27th at 8 p.m.
8 p.m. is my recommendation.
Okay, so the motion as amended has been made and seconded. All those in favor, roll call vote. Chuck?
Yes.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Cindy? Is aye. So the motion is approved as amended. The public hearing is continued till April 27th at 8 p.m. Okay. Trying to find the agenda.
Thank you all for your patience. I'll just say a couple words while we transition to the next item. One of the things that we did find in this process is if attendees of the meeting mute themselves, you can't unmute yourself without the host's permission. And we appreciate everyone's patience as we went through the unmuting process. We're still learning this platform every time we go through it. So thank you.
Okay. So the public hearing has been concluded. We did, in the chain of agenda items, skip over agenda item number 3. So I wanted to maybe quickly revisit that. It was department and board updates and staff updates regarding COVID-19.
And I apologize. I was supposed to text the police and fire chief because I offered that to them when we went into this item. Could we potentially go into board member updates in the meantime while I notify them that we're back on?
Sure. So we will go with board member updates. Chase, do you have anything to share?
Nothing major, except I did sit in on the school committee meeting earlier, and they're canceling April break and doing online classes during the week of April break and shortening the school year 4 days commensurately.
Okay, thank you. Chuck, do you have anything?
I do not, Cindy. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And Paul, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, on another school topic, active resident Anne Marie Krause, who I notice is attending via Zoom, came up with an idea, which is run by a few town officials, and I encourage her to go to the school department. I think she has run it by the school department for trying to help out the seniors who, face the prospect of not being able to fully enjoy their graduation time of year and all that. And her proposal is, with proper approvals, to put up pictures on the common of all the graduates with their participation, the school's approval, and there's probably, I think an email was forwarded in today. I think Nina, you have it, do you? Or
yes.
You do? Okay. Yeah, but I wonder if, with the chair's permission, rather than have me speak to it, whether we could invite Ms. Krause to if you'd like to be unmuted and talk about our idea a little bit.
Hello?
There she is.
Oh, I'm on. Oh my goodness. I've never done this.
So proud of you, Anne Marie.
Look at you.
Yeah, you don't fake shy. That ain't you.
Doesn't fit.
Yes, so what I would like to do is, and I've talked to John Harrington and Keith Camo. I sent them an email. I sent an email. Actually, Maureen helped me out, and I got in touch with Chris over at Minuteman Press, who did the veterans banners. And I got a quote from him. But what I would like to do is if I could get in touch with the teacher that did the yearbook at the high school that has all the senior pictures of the kids and their names, and have them sent over to Minuteman Press. I want John to help me out with getting in touch with the parents through his way, through his emails, making sure everybody gets, contacted, because we don't want to leave anybody out. And I think the cost for the lawn signs, which will be 18 by 24, would be under $20 per sign, and each sign would have their senior picture on it. What I would like to do is see if and I know that with the quarantine and everything, that we would have maybe 3 people, one do each side of the common, putting the signs up, so nobody, it's not like we're going to have 30 people out there putting the signs up, just a couple of us out there putting them up. And I also thought that after, hopefully, when everything is lifted and we have the senior parade, that we could use those when the kids go by. Just something I thought of to maybe give them a little show support, because they're going through a really difficult time right now.
I think that's a great idea, Anne Marie. Thank you for putting that together. How can people get in touch with you? I know you said that they were going to be contacted through the school, but is there another way that you're gathering information and about upcoming seniors?
I wanted to get permission before I really moved forward. I did talk to John and Keith, and I thought, because they have a whole list of how to contact the kids, and what I would like to do is get a list and figure out with John how we can contact them and get just get a list together. And I was actually going to talk to you, Cindy, on how you thought, should we do it Venmo, or how you guys did it with the veteran flags, the banners.
Right. So Maureen can help you with that, because that went through the Friends of Littleton Veterans as far as collecting the payment and whatnot for the banners. That's how we did it, through the Friends. Anne Marie, do you have any idea how many graduating seniors there are this year?
That was another thing that I figure we're between 100 and 150. I know when the kids first came in, there was 158. They were the largest class coming through at their time. And I did send an email out to John Harrington again this morning. He's been very good about getting back to me as to what the numbers for the graduating classes. Now, somebody else brought up to me, and I don't know if we should add them to it. Do we go for just the Littleton High School? Somebody had said, how some of the names did not get on the Veterans Corner. Do we bring Parker into it because they are Littleton residents? Or do we just do Littleton High School? Because I don't know the kids that are out of town.
Right. Those are all good questions.
So, if I can jump in.
So we can, oh, sure. Go ahead, Chuck.
I was going to say, the Littleton residents. So I think they should all be included. But
okay.
Obviously, John Harrington can't, although the superintendent's office definitely has those numbers.
That's what I thought.
But it would probably take some coordination from you or some other volunteer to reach out to the principal at Parker, the principal at Neshoba Tech. When we start getting into, kids that are going to maybe Lawrence Academy
or right.
Girton or something like that, it may get a little more difficult. So unfortunately, a kid or two may end up slipping through the cracks. So,
Right.
But, the school department can definitely help you out with those numbers.
Those logistics are kind of beyond our grasp, but they ought to be explored. I think the important thing we need to do, or I think our trying to think of what we play into all this is granting access to use of the common, where you can put them, what they can look like, and for how long they can be up, and whatever, I would defer to whoever ought to be, administratively looking over that one. It doesn't, fine with me, whatever seems reasonable.
Right. And Anne Marie, I'll follow up with you offline too.
Perfect. Madam
So,
Chair,
but-
just a logistical question from a lawn cutting standpoint. And I know we do have one individual who's raised their hand, but obviously trying to get through the board's questions and other questions at this point first. So my question for you, Anne Marie, is how long, do you have an estimation of how long you were thinking of doing this? It sounds like a wonderful cause. I'm just concerned that we're not going to be able to mow. And, if we have something in the order of 100 or so signs, it would take a long time to remove the signs, mow, and then put the signs back in. I'm not trying to be the damp blanket here, but.
No, I was just, if I could be granted any time to have them out, I would be happy with that. I just thought it would be really nice for the kids to see that. And then we can put them on our personal lawns after that. I thought that would be fun too. Use them like that. But I thought it would be really nice for them to come through and get honored through a really difficult time right now. I mean, they are having a tough time. I know everybody is, but I think that they can't have a do-over. There's no do-over.
Maybe the week before graduation or something.
Yeah.
I think if they could be up for a couple of weeks, and I wouldn't worry so much. I was going to raise the same question relative to maintenance and trying not to be a hindrance to Chris's staff. But I think that if we made sure that Anne Marie, and I'd volunteer to help you out with this part of it, Anne Marie, I could figure out some logistics and volunteer some of my boys to go down there and mow around the signs or weed whack around the signs. That's the beauty of a big family. But I absolutely, and I can coordinate that with Chris, and I'm sure that we can work it out as far as the union and all that kind of stuff. So I think that we can get through this, and I think it's your point. It would be good to have them up there for a couple of weeks, and then right around graduation time to have them on their home property.
I think it would be great. I think it would be, and money wise, that was another thing that I want to work closely with John. Is I want to make sure that the kids that are opting out of it are opting out of it because they don't maybe not want their sign up, but not because of financial reasons, because I can get backing for that. So
again, the schools will have that information too, because we have the free and reduced lunch, and there's different qualifications and things.
And that would be, that would be something John would have to handle rather than, I think for privacy.
Exactly.
That would be for John to make sure that was taken care of, that each one was contacted.
Right.
A great idea, Anne Marie.
Really good.
Yeah, it really is.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening too. And I just thought about this yesterday. I mean, I was thinking about maybe the banners, but they were so much, and the turnaround time would be difficult, and then to get the town to hang them, and then Maureen and I were bouncing things off each other. So.
All right, we know that you can keep talking for another half an hour on this.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're only an hour and a half behind schedule already.
Yeah.
You guys are funny. You know me too well.
Madam Chair,
thank you.
Public comment? I'm not sure if we're taking public comment at this point, but there is one public comment.
Sure.
I'll be fast.
Okay.
Hi, Christine Nordhaus, Star Hill. I just want to say that there are Littleton seniors who are part of the Littleton Public School District who go to the Tech and Parker, and I would be very happy to help reach out to those principals or whoever through Anne Marie or whatever. But I think, we all have seniors from Littleton who don't go to the high school, but they're still Littleton seniors. And I think
Absolutely.
love them.
I'll agree with that.
So Anne Marie, follow up with me if, through the chair, Madam Chair. I love saying Madam Chair so much. But follow up with me. I'll do any legwork for you that I can through, for the Parker School and the Tech or any other school, and get you money, whatever you need.
Thank you.
Idea. Thank you.
Great.
Never called me Madam Chair.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks, Anne Marie.
Thank you,
Christine.
Thank you, guys.
So I see that we have Chief Wodzinski on the line, on the call. So I had a member update, but I'll defer it for now. I don't want to keep the chief waiting any longer. I know his time is valuable.
Thanks. So I just wanted to give everybody kind of a quick update over the last week, at least since the last one we talked. I had communications with the Neshoba Board of Health today, and I believe the last time we talked, Neshoba Board of Health had set up an agreement to communicate with Life Care on a daily basis. That has been ongoing. It is with Tamara Bedard from the Neshoba Board of Health, the epidemiologist from DPH, as well as their investigator. And they're having daily calls, daily check-ins as far as status of the facility. And they're also giving out a daily press release as far as numbers. And in speaking to them this evening, they're satisfied with the direction that it's going. Granted, a little bit late, but it is going. The initial report of the investigators, the independent investigators, were there last Friday. They were there for, I guess, a good chunk of the day. They do not have a report yet, but the initial report from the investigators that everything seemed to be in position and organized. Obviously, they've had enough time to make sure that everything should be in order there. They were still waiting on policies and procedures and things of that nature. So, I would hope in the next week or two we'd have some type of a report from the independent investigation team that was there last Friday. But again, the communications is ongoing, and the numbers are changing on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And we also have Chief Pinard on the call as well.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Or should I say good night?
I know, right?
I really have nothing
Good
to
morning.
add. Right, Chase?
Just keep going.
Chief Wodzinski and I have been in constant contact. Dispatch center is on the mend, doing a lot better as of actually today. Patrol is very healthy, knock on wood, and we'll keep moving on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I was just going to add for my member update, unless the chiefs have
you already
anything else
missed it.
to add. What?
You already missed it.
I didn't. I'm the chair.
Alexander Haig, here we go.
Joe, come back.
Are we through? So I just want to remind the public about the Littleton Affordable Housing Trust, that we do have a rental voucher program available to help any residents who are struggling right now, especially during the pandemic, meeting their housing obligations. If they rent a home, an apartment, or even we have determined that we can assist people at the mobile home park. I've been trying to reach any of the residents that live at the mobile home park as well, just to make sure that they're aware of the rental voucher program available through the Littleton Affordable Housing Trust. If anyone wants more information or has questions about the program, they can contact the Department of Elder and Human Affairs at Town Hall. And there's also an application available on the town website, www.littletonma.org, and just search Affordable Housing Trust and it'll bring you to the application.
Now I feel bad for giving you a hard time.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. So that is all for member updates and the public hearing. The next agenda item is item number 6, Triumph Modular, an amendment to the dealer license location.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one's, I think, pretty straightforward. Triumph Modular is seeking to amend their dealer license certificate, removing 83 Ayer Road from their certificate and only having 194 Ayer Road on their certificate. If you'd like, we can go into more detail. Also, maybe the board has already had an opportunity to take a look at that and wishes to just make the motion and keep moving.
I think we can move on.
We can just, I think we're ready for a motion.
I think so.
Then I'll move that the board vote to amend the address for the dealer license certificate for Triumph Modular to be only 194 Air Road, removing 83 Air Road.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, roll call vote. Chuck?
Aye.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
He hand signaled it.
Oh, I said aye.
Oh, he did? Okay. Myself, aye. So the motion passes as written.
And just as a quick point of information, we'll probably send that document out via DocuSign to you and ask that you sign the certificate. We've never done that before, but we're trying new things.
Perfect. And we're now on to agenda item number 7, Town Administrator.
Yes. We have item A, item C, and item D. For the time being, we're recommending passing over item B, which is Nagog Hill Orchard. We need a little bit more time to work with the property owner on the lease language and paperwork. Joe would have more specifics on that if anyone has any questions. For Green Communities grant application, we're looking to put in our 4th competitive grant application for 3 years in a row. Littleton has done an absolutely phenomenal job, and that credit obviously belongs to the staff and the board for continuing to pursue that. Special recognition to a number of different people, obviously Diane Dickerson, but also our school department, who's made very, very good use of these grants, and really applaud them for that. But at this point, we do have a number of school proposals and 2 town proposals. The school proposals, we can certainly discuss them if the board would like. Understanding we've been here for quite some time, I'm going to jump over that and just talk very quickly about the town proposals. We submitted 2 town proposals, and one is for lighting in the multipurpose room. It's a pretty straightforward application. Specifically, the return on that is basically slightly over 1 year. There's a second proposal to do hallway and stairwell lighting for the Shattuck Street building. Both these proposals are for the Shattuck Street building. And in that case, that requires a number more years. It's about a 5 or so year rate of return, or break even, if you will. And for that, I think it's worth it. I do think that it's likely, based on what we have in front of us in terms of priorities and what I've understood from the board in terms of priorities for buildings, not even speaking to the economic challenges we are likely to be faced with over the course of the next several years. We obviously have an approved library project that's moving forward, and the board, I believe, wishes to prioritize at a minimum next senior center of some sort in some fashion that addresses our senior needs. And as a result, I don't anticipate vacating the Shattuck Street building at any point in the immediate future, and that's why we're recommending these projects. Tried to make that as quick as possible, so happy to answer any questions or hear the board's feedback or suggestions for a different approach if there are any.
Are these calibrated to our needs or to what is most likely to get funded?
I believe it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Certainly it's our needs, but also it's where there are, preferences in terms of loss of time and resources, where they shouldn't be allocated.
I ask that because we've been very successful in the past asking the state for things that are their priorities, even if they're only our C priority instead of our A priority. So
Sure.
as long as you've put some thought into that,
Yeah.
I trust your assessment. This is the right setup.
It's a good question. Any other comments from the board on this?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, relative to repurposing, reusing, space needs, if we were going to, multi-purpose room very much comes into play as we talk about some of the repurposing, reusing of that building. And with this less than around a 1 year return, I think it's probably worthwhile no matter what we do with that space to execute. But I think I'd want to look a little more at the 5+ year return to see if we're going to be moving walls and reconfiguring spaces on the third floor as has been proposed. What impact will that have on some of the investment that we make in changing any lighting now? So I'd want to look more into that one, not so much on the one for the multipurpose room.
Okay.
Sure. If the board, I think the deadline is in May, so we could bring this back to a future meeting and discuss it further if the board would like.
If the rest of the board is okay with it, then I'm happy to move forward with it. I just don't want
to. Yep.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I hear you,
It's a
Chuck.
good-
It's a bandwidth issue to me.
Yeah,
So,
right. It's a good point, Chuck, but
but we're ignoring you. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming.
and I'll go along with you. We'll get consent.
thank you for finishing my thought, Chase.
Anything,
Okay.
Madam Chair. Then I'll move that the board vote to submit the Green Communities grant application containing the projects as presented.
And I'll second it.
There you go. Motion has been made and seconded. Roll call vote, please. Chuck?
Yes.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Cindy is aye. So the motion passes as written. We're skipping over item 7B.
I like this.
Item 7C, Nina?
Yes, and I'll do 7C and D together if you guys would
Sure.
like. There are two
Second.
bicycle events, if you will. And both the police and fire chiefs have reviewed them and at this time have no issues with their proposed events.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Just need a motion. I don't know if the board has historically done
I'll
motions.
move that the board vote to authorize the Bikes Not Bonds annual fundraising event on Saturday, June 14th, 2020 on the roads request in the March 2020 letter, and move that the board vote to authorize the Harvard Firefighters Association annual bike race events on Saturday, August 8th, 2020 on the roads request in the April 8th, 2020 email and the reference street map.
Second.
Perfect. Motion has been,
With all the 20s we had. Thank you, Paul.
you know, right? Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor, roll call vote. Chuck?
Aye.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Cindy is aye. So both motions pass as written. And we are on to minutes.
We recognize that the board received the minutes very late this afternoon, so if the board wishes to pass over it, we certainly understand.
I personally didn't have a chance to review them. I can't speak to other board
I didn't
members.
either. I gotta be honest on that.
Move it on.
Okay, so we'll continue that. Okay, so last agenda item is an executive session.
I'll move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body and the chair so declares, and to not reconvene an open session thereafter.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor, roll call vote. Chuck?
Aye.
Chase?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
Cindy is aye. So we're going to now leave open session. We're going to enter into executive session and we will not be returning to open session this evening. So we will see members of the public at our next scheduled board meeting, which is date
27th.
Yes, the 27th.
April 27th. Great. Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.